Hey guys! Tonight, we slip into a place where time boils slowly, where steam curls like poetry, and where life is measured not in hours, but in cups. You're in the Ottoman Empire now, specifically before the sun even thinks about rising. You're a coffee seller in the heart of Istanbul, and your day is about to begin, even though technically it's still night. You probably won't survive this, not because of danger or drama, but because staying awake through this level of routine comfort is an Olympian task. The whisper of roasting beans, the low murmur of prayers in the street, the slow hiss of copper over charcoal. It's also soporific, like being wrapped in a warm, caffeinated cloud, except you're the one making the cloud. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm not saying I'll read your coffee grounds, but I will notice if you hit that button. Also, drop a comment with your location and local time. I love knowing where in the world you're slowly drifting off. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your shop is still closed, but the air in your lungs smells like roasted wood and faint cardamom. You stir under a thin cotton sheet and hear the call of a rooster from somewhere far off, one of those overly ambitious birds that crows before its time. The city is mostly quiet, save for the occasional clink of a cartwheel on cobblestone, or the soft sweep of a janitor's broom in a mosque courtyard. You rub your eyes, stretch, and yawn into your shoulder. There's no alarm clock, no digital beep, just the instinct of habit and the promise of beans waiting in their clay jar. In the small back room behind your coffee shop, a space barely big enough for a cot and a stack of linens, you pull on your worn cotton tunic, still faintly fragrant with spice. It's not fancy, but it's familiar. The hem is frayed from years of brushing against tables, counters, and the occasional wandering cat. You move quietly, like someone who knows the floorboards well. You light the small oil lamp with a practiced flick, then open the wooden shutter just a crack to let in a breath of pre-dawn air. The stars above the Bosporus still glitter like flecks of salt, and the first traces of ash-blue light begin to soften the skyline of domes and minarets. The day begins not with conversation, but with preparation. You head into the heart of your shop, where the hearth sleeps like an old dog curled in ashes. You crouch down and coax it awake. First, a gentle blow, then a folded scrap of paper, then dry twigs from the storage crate beneath the spice rack. Slowly, patiently, it catches. You don't rush fire. Fire has its own logic, especially when it's about to cradle your livelihood.
With the hearth humming to itself in orange whispers, you fetch your sezve, the long-handled copper pot shaped like a funnel with dreams. It's still blackened from yesterday's work, the rim holding a faint line of caramelized coffee residue. You rinse it gently, respecting the ghosts of past brews. Next comes the bean jar. It's heavy, made of dark glazed clay with a lid that never quite fits right. You open it and breathe in deeply. Even in the early dark, even before the first cup is poured, this smell is holy. Roasted Arabica, imported by camel train from Yemen, handed off through traders, eventually finding its way into your hands and hearth. Historians still argue whether the Ottomans were the first to truly ritualize coffee, or if the Sufi monasteries of Yemen deserve that crown. But right now, there's no debate. It's just you, the beans, and the silence. You scoop a generous handful into the grinder. It's hand-cranked, made of brass and shaped like a miniature cannon. You hold it between your knees and turn slowly. The sound is rhythmic, hypnotic. Grr, 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 grr. Each rotation reducing whole beans to a fragrant, soft dust. You close your eyes and keep turning, lulled by the sensation. A little part of you hopes this never ends. But it does. And now the coffee is ready. You measure it carefully, without hurry. A heaping spoonful for each cup, plus one for the pot, as the old saying goes. Then the water, cool, drawn from your rain barrel, stored overnight in a ceramic jug to keep it tasting like stone and sky. You mix it gently in the sezve with a long-handled spoon, the same way your father taught you, always in one direction, always clockwise. Don't ask why. No one knows, but everyone agrees counterclockwise makes bitter coffee and bad luck. You place the sezve over the embers and wait. This is not espresso. This is not a Keurig. Ottoman coffee is not about speed, it's about presence. You watch the surface shimmer. Tiny bubbles form at the edge like polite guests arriving early. You know not to let it boil, only to let it almost boil. The moment when the foam climbs but doesn't spill is the moment you remove it. This is called bringing the coffee to a rise. You do it once, then again, and again. Some say 3 times makes it strongest. Others say once is enough. You do it twice because your shop is known for balance. Strong but never aggressive. Rich but never muddy. The foam is thick and golden. You spoon it gently into the cup first, then pour the coffee on top. This ensures the cream floats perfectly, like a silk veil on dark water. But you don't drink it yet. Not now. The first cup is never for you. It's for the shop. You place the cup on the tray by the window, next to a tiny bowl of rose water and a sugar cube wrapped in paper. It will be cold by the time someone drinks it, but that's not the point. It's symbolic. A greeting, a promise, a small announcement that today, as with all days, coffee will be made here and it will be made well. Outside, the street is still mostly empty, but you see shadows moving now. Merchants lifting stall covers, boys running errands, bakers carrying trays of dough to the ovens. The day is stirring, just like the coffee, and you are ready.
The hearth is now fully awake, glowing orange with occasional sparks that rise like sleepy fireflies. The sezve sits to the side, its copper belly cooling as you wipe the handle and hang it on its usual nail above the spice shelf. Your fingers still hum from the morning ritual, the quiet rhythm of grind and pour, of heat and foam. But the next task awaits, a slow dance of wrist and fire, brass and bean, roasting. This part is almost meditative. You lift the lid on a small wooden crate near the wall, revealing your precious hoard of raw, green coffee beans. They're pale and firm, with a scent not unlike fresh-cut hay, mixed with something faintly vegetable, almost like unripe peas. Not particularly appetizing in this form, but in their hardness lies potential. You measure out just enough beans for the day's first roast, enough for a few dozen cups, no more. Roasted coffee loses its magic quickly, and the Ottoman clientele, even the groggy ones, can tell when a cup has lost its character. There's an unspoken standard, and you meet it every time. You pour the beans into your roasting pan, which looks like a wide copper skillet with a long wooden handle and a slotted lid. It clicks into place with a soft clack. Then the gentle part begins. You hold it just above the coals, turning it slowly, keeping the beans in constant motion. Not too fast, not too hot, like warming a baby chick with a candle. As the minutes pass, a transformation begins. First, a faint grassy smell fills the shop. Then, the sharp scent of heated oils. You hear the first pops, a single crack, then a stuttering rhythm like tiny fireworks deep in the pan. This is called the first crack, a signal that the beans are entering their most flavorful phase. You nod to yourself. You've done this hundreds of times, but it never gets old. Historians still argue whether the Ottomans developed this roasting technique independently or adapted it from earlier Arabian methods. Some say the beans were originally roasted on flat stones, others claim the rotating pan was inspired by grain roasting devices used in Anatolia. Whatever the truth, you've inherited the process like a song passed down through generations. With every turn, the color deepens, pale green to tan, then golden brown, then a rich, warm mahogany. You adjust the height subtly, lifting the pan if it hisses too loud, lowering it again if the popping slows too much. There's no thermometer. Your eyes, ears, and nose are your tools. You trust them. A customer once said your roast tasted like the memory of summer in a winter palace. You didn't quite know what that meant, but it sounded poetic, so you nodded solemnly. The truth is, your roast is solid, balanced, and consistent. Not flashy, just comforting. As the final crackle fades, you remove the pan from the flame and lay it across a stone slab. The smell is extraordinary, sweet, earthy, smoky. You unlatch the lid and pour the beans into a large wooden bowl where they'll rest and cool. Stirring them with a long spoon, you let them breathe. This is important. Rushing this part dulls the flavor. At this hour, the shop is still empty, though the outside world is no longer asleep. You can hear the faint calls of street vendors hawking bread, herbs, and dried fruit. The smell of simit, those sesame-crusted bread rings, wafts through your open window, taunting your stomach. You make a mental note to snag one later from the old man with the red cart.
You pour the freshly roasted beans into a ceramic jar with a wide neck. This jar lives on the counter next to your grinder, where regulars like to lean in and sniff approvingly. They don't always buy, but they do always sniff. It's part of the ritual. And now, with your daily batch roasted, you take a moment for yourself. You fill the sezve again, this time with your own carefully measured mixture. No sugar, no spices, just water and beans, mixed in that slow, clockwise motion. You heat it, watching the dark foam rise like the moon over the horizon. You stop it just in time, twice, then pour the thick brew into a small porcelain cup with a hairline crack on one side. You cradle the cup in both hands and sip. It is bitter, not sharply so, but gently bitter, like old memories or unsent letters. The taste is bold but quiet, leaving a faint sweetness on the back of your tongue. You exhale slowly, letting the steam warm your face. This is not a drink, it's a pause, a tiny ceremony of grounding, a deep breath for the day ahead. As you finish your cup, the shop begins to brighten with the soft gray light of dawn. Shadows shrink back. Dust motes begin their lazy dance through beams of sun slipping past the shutters. The wooden floor creaks beneath your feet as you move to sweep it, collecting stray grounds, bits of ash, and the occasional almond shell left behind by last night's guests. You hear a familiar sound, the soft patter of paws. The shop cat has returned from whatever mysterious business it conducts during the night. It saunters in without a glance, hops onto its favorite cushion near the warm hearth, and immediately begins licking one paw with exaggerated dignity. You nod. "Good morning, Sultan," you whisper. He ignores you, as usual. You continue preparing quietly. A brass tray is polished with a bit of cloth soaked in lemon water. Tiny cups are stacked neatly on the shelf. The rosewater bowl is refilled, and sugar cubes are wrapped in fresh paper squares. Each act is small, but deliberate. The Ottomans may have conquered empires, but they also perfected the art of presentation. There's an old saying, coffee should be as black as night, as strong as death, and as sweet as love. You've heard it 1,000 times, and every time a customer recites it dramatically, you smile as if it's the first. It's good manners. Besides, they mean well. Outside, the street begins to hum with life. A boy runs past with a loaf of bread tucked under one arm.
A woman in a headscarf balances a basket of mint on her hip. A seller calls out in a long, melodic tone about ripe figs and pomegranates. And somewhere in the distance, a muezzin begins the first call to prayer. The city exhales, stretches, and rises. You turn your sign from closed to open, though most regulars ignore it. They know the true signal, the first curl of steam from your sezve drifting into the air, mingling with the smells of morning, wrapping Istanbul in its ancient, fragrant warmth.
The street is officially alive now, bustling with the sort of gentle chaos only a city like Istanbul can manage before breakfast. You hear wooden wheels creaking under carts of herbs, the jingling of copper pans from the metalworker's stall, and a few half-shouted greetings between rival vendors. Part grumble, part gossip, always loud enough for nearby ears. Yet here in your shop, the pace remains slow, on purpose. You crouch at the hearth again, feeding it a few small pieces of dried fig wood. It burns slow and sweet, giving off that soft, resinous scent that somehow makes coffee taste rounder. You brush a few ashes away with a horsehair whisk and gently rest the chesve on a bed of glowing charcoal. It's already filled and waiting, the grounds floating like brown silt in clear mountain water. Your copper utensils glint in the morning light. Long spoons, slotted ladles, brass tongs, each one polished not for show, but because clean tools make good coffee. Ottoman drinkers may nap through politics, but they notice grime. And heaven help you if someone finds last night's ground stuck to the inside of the chesve. You hear footsteps at the door, a steady, familiar shuffle. It's old Halem, your first customer of the day. He doesn't speak much, which suits you just fine. Words this early feel like crimes. You nod silently and gesture to the same low stool he always takes, the one beside the faded blue cushion that still smells faintly of cloves. He lowers himself with a groan, mutters something about his back, and stares out the window like it owes him money. As the chesve begins to warm, you prepare his cup the way you always do. No sugar, thick foam, tiny saucer, and a square of pistachio candy. He doesn't eat the candy, but he likes to know it's there. Ritual is everything. The chesve whispers now. Little bubbles form at the rim, but you don't stir. You never stir. Instead, you shift the handle slightly, allowing the heat to gather slowly, coaxing the crema to rise like a gentle tide. Not a single sound in the room except the occasional shift of Halim's sandals and the distant cooing of pigeons near the awning. The foam reaches the top. You remove the chesve with a graceful, practiced motion. No spills, no fuss. You tilt the coffee into Halim's cup, letting the foam arrive first. You hear the soft hiss as it settles, thick and golden brown. Then the dark liquid follows, slow as honey, filling the small porcelain cup just to the brim. You place the saucer before him. He nods once, slowly, without looking. He sips. The silence deepens. This is the moment you work for. Not applause, not riches, just that quiet sip, that nearly imperceptible sigh, and the knowledge that Halim, grumpy though he may be, finds something worth waking up for in your cup. More footsteps follow, faster this time. A pair of brothers, Ali and Osman, burst in with the energy of two kittens in a sack. They talk over each other, arguing whether the Grand Vizier once drank 9 cups in a single sitting. You raise one eyebrow and begin preparing their chesves side by side. They like it sweet, with cardamom and a hint of cinnamon, but they never agree on the ratio.
Historians still argue whether spices in Ottoman coffee were a matter of class, custom, or regional pride. Some sources say sweetened, spiced coffee was more common among the elite, while others suggest it depended entirely on local preference and what was available. Either way, the boys have turned it into a daily competition. Who can detect the difference? Who can win the cup? You humor them, adjusting the seasoning just so, pouring slowly,
evenly, until the two cups sit side by side, twin pools of aromatic perfection. They each take a sip, nod, then resume their argument with renewed vigor, as though the caffeine activates their lungs. You drift away toward your utensils again, cleaning, resetting, refilling the water jug. The motions are automatic now, a choreography etched into your limbs. You stir the sugar jar, top off the spice bowls, and lay out two fresh napkins folded like little fans. Outside, the sun is higher now. You can see it warming the rooftops, turning domes to gold. The call to the mid-morning prayer echoes faintly down the alley, bouncing off stone walls like a lullaby for grown-ups. More customers arrive, slowly, steadily. A bookseller with ink-stained fingers, a widow in a green shawl who always brings her own dates, a pair of traveling musicians who drink in silence and leave tiny copper coins, each one etched with something different. They never say where they're from, and you never ask. They're part of the morning now, as reliable as sunrise. One of the shop's favorite features, aside from your coffee, is the brass water basin near the entrance. New visitors marvel at this, ornate, shaped like a tulip, with a narrow spout and a chain for rinsing fingers before drinking. Some say it was gifted by a merchant from Damascus. Others believe it was looted from a forgotten caravan. You know it was just bought secondhand from a neighbor's uncle, but you let the mystery live. You rinse the jezve again, shake out the last stubborn grounds and refill it. This time, you prepare a personal batch, not for you, but for the shop. A display cup, as some joke. You set it on the windowsill where the light hits it just right, the steam catching sunbeams like silk thread. It's the visual equivalent of a welcome mat. People passing by pause to inhale, smile, and often wander in. It's around this time that a few coffee competitors set up nearby. Not actual shops, no, those are blocks away, but street sellers, peddling weaker brews from battered pots. You don't resent them. Everyone has to make a living. But you do quietly take pride when customers pass them by with a knowing glance, heading toward your door instead. That's the thing about Ottoman coffee sellers. You're not just making a drink, you're making an atmosphere, a ritual, a small space of consistency in a world that frankly smells a bit like fish, horses, and palace intrigue. And in that ritual lies the secret to your sleep-inducing success. Nothing rushes here. Even arguments are slow. Even gossip is whispered over cups so small they force you to linger. The foam is your currency, the silence between sips your schedule, and every part of your morning, from hearth to hands to the tilt of your jezve, follows a choreography older than some empires. As the boys leave, still arguing about the vizier and his mystical ninth cup, you wipe their table, fold their napkins, and place 2 more sugar cubes beside the ceramic plate. Someone will be back. Maybe not them, maybe not even today, but someone always returns. And you, as always, will be ready.
The heat of the day begins to stir, slow and sticky, curling into the corners of your little coffee shop like a sleepy cat looking for shade. You feel it first in your neck, then along the backs of your arms. Subtle, almost polite for now. But you know by mid-afternoon, it will be sprawled unapologetically across every surface, clinging to the brass like an uninvited guest who somehow already moved in. So, you move deliberately. You unfasten the canvas canopy over the shop's open window, letting it drop with a dusty flap that sends 2 pigeons fluttering off your awning in protest. The light softens, just a little, and the scent of roasting eggplant from the neighbor's tandoor replaces the morning bread smell. The city's flavor palette has shifted. You glance around the room. The cups are in neat rows again. The embers in the hearth glow steady. A fresh stack of napkins sits by the polished water basin. All is prepared, as it must be, for the midday lull. Because in the Ottoman rhythm of the day, this hour, the hour just before true lunch, is not about rush or conversation, it's about rest. And yes, more coffee. A middle-aged man enters, removing his turban respectfully as he does so. His name is Yavuz, though everyone calls him the Whisperer. Not for any mystical reason, but because he simply never raises his voice above a sigh. You greet him with the same quiet nod you've given for years. He always brings a book, always orders medium sugar, and always leaves behind a folded page marked with a pressed violet. You have no idea why. You've stopped wondering. You begin his coffee as you've done 100 times. Water, spoonful of your roasted grounds, a generous pinch of sugar, stirred in that same hypnotic spiral. You hold it over the embers, never looking away as the surface begins to shimmer, then tremble. You pull it away just before it spills over, the timing exact, as always. The chesve is your hourglass, your metronome, your oracle. Historians still argue whether the Ottoman preference for unfiltered coffee was a matter of practicality or poetic stubbornness. Some suggest it came from a desire to stretch the experience, to let the grinds settle, to encourage slower drinking. Others believe it was simply a holdover from earlier Bedouin methods. Either way, the grounds at the bottom of the cup are part of the point, a bitter punctuation mark. Yavuz takes his cup with a soft thank you, no louder than a breeze slipping through silk. He settles in, opens his book, and disappears into the pages. You let him be. It's not time for chatter. Instead, you clean the brass sugar tongs. They squeak faintly as you polish them. Then you refill the rosewater bowl with a new petal. The water ripples slightly as the pink leaf floats, and you catch your own reflection, blurred and upside down, in its mirrored surface. You look tired, but not unhappy. There's a rhythm to this hour that few people understand unless they've lived it. The early crowd has left, the noisy street sellers have wandered off to the bazaar or slumped into naps under shade trees. Even the pigeons grow lazy, cooing rather than flapping. The whole quarter seems to hold its breath, as if the city itself is exhaling before the hotter tasks of the day. You take advantage of the stillness to do something you rarely admit aloud. You sketch.
Beneath the counter, tucked behind a sack of raw beans, lies a bundle of folded papers and a charcoal stub wrapped in old cotton. You draw when no one's watching, mostly scenes from your shop. The curve of a jezve's handle, the way foam glides over a cup's rim, or the sleeping cat curled against the hearth bricks. Today, though, you sketch Yavuz's hands. They're good hands. Elegant, weathered, quietly expressive as they turn the pages of his book. You wonder what he reads. You never ask. You're not alone in your quiet creativity. There's a long, often overlooked tradition of artistry among Ottoman coffee sellers. Many were poets, calligraphers, or amateur musicians. A few even kept journals, day-to-day observations of their shops, customers, and the shifting tastes of their neighborhoods. One such manuscript, they say, survived centuries folded inside a hollowed-out coffee bean. That's probably not true, but it's a nice image. And in this hour, with no one needing you urgently, you can imagine your own journal, the texture of each day, the scent of roasting beans, the ache in your knees, the occasional laughter, the quiet joy of doing something well, even if no one ever truly sees it. You hear the bell above the door jingle gently. A young couple enters. Visitors, not locals. They glance around as though uncertain whether they're allowed in. You smile and gesture toward an empty cushion. They sit, slowly, nervously.
You've seen this before. Tourists trying to act like they belong, unsure of the rules. You decide to keep it simple. You prepare 2 cups of plain coffee, one slightly sweet, the other unsweetened. You serve them quietly, letting the gesture speak. They accept it with grateful nods, murmuring a thank you in accented Turkish. You smile again, more with your eyes than your mouth. They take their first sips. The woman winces, perhaps expecting it to taste like what she knows as coffee. The man nods thoughtfully, as if decoding a puzzle. You say nothing. Let the drink speak. After a few minutes, the woman leans toward her partner and whispers something, pointing at the jezve hanging above your hearth. He pulls out a small sketchbook and begins drawing the scene. You raise an eyebrow, amused. Maybe you'll sketch him later, sketching you. The shop is quiet again. Yavuz still reads. The couple murmurs and sips. The breeze flutters the edge of your curtain. The coals hiss softly. A drop of condensation slides down the side of the water pitcher. This is the art of Ottoman coffee. Less a drink, more an environment, a slowing of time, a calming of breath, a rhythm that resists the world's obsession with haste. And you? You are its teeper. The spoon in your hand is not just a tool, it's a tuning fork. The jezve, your orchestra. The cups, your audience. And in this slow symphony of grind, pour, foam, and silence, you find your place each day between the heat and the hush, the history and the habit. Outside, the sun has begun to climb in earnest. The city shimmers faintly with midday glare. But inside, under the soft canopy, behind the dark wood counter, in the scent of cardamom and the scratch of pencil on paper, everything remains quiet. And still, the coffee flows.
You shift your weight onto the wooden stool behind the counter, the one with the slight wobble that you've grown so used to it now feels like a feature rather than a flaw. The cushion beneath you is flat from years of use, but the threadbare fabric carries memories. Spilled sugar, a forgotten poem scribbled in haste, a tear or two hidden in the folds during slower, lonelier mornings. Outside, the world starts to hum again. It's the beginning of the midday stir, a soft crescendo of hooves, sandals, and gossip. You hear it gathering momentum in the narrow street, curling like steam around the cornerstones of the mosque. The prayers have ended. The faithful have stretched, sighed, and wandered back into the living world, their spiritual reset complete. And what better way to transition from divine peace to daily toil than with a hot, earthy cup of coffee? A man appears in the doorway. His robe is richly embroidered, but dusty, his beard neatly trimmed, his expression equal parts dignity and sunstroke. You recognize him immediately. Shaheen Effendi, part-time historian, full-time exaggerator. He rarely drinks more than a few sips, but he tells stories like he's narrating an epic carved into marble. You pour without asking. Medium sugar, heavy foam, extra slow pour. He insists it enhances the flavor, though you suspect he just likes being watched. As he takes his seat and launches into a tale about a caravan raid that may or may not have involved a jealous camel and a missing bag of Yemeni beans, you nod along, half listening. You've heard versions of this story before, none quite the same twice, but his voice is warm, his presence oddly comforting. He's part of the texture now, like the crack in the tiled floor or the scorch mark near the hearth. Shaheen pauses to sip and sighs theatrically. Not too hot. You remember. Of course you do. Your job isn't just making coffee. It's remembering how people take it, how they sit, how they pause between sentences. It's remembering which cup belongs to whom, which saucer bears a chip that a superstitious merchant avoids, and which spoon was used by the poet who once claimed your brew cured his writer's block. You smiled then and said it was probably the cinnamon. He didn't laugh.
Historians still argue whether Ottoman coffee houses served primarily as venues for refreshment or as incubators of conversation and subversion. Some accounts describe them as extensions of the street, open to all, full of laughter and idle chat. Others portray them as suspect corners of resistance, where men gathered to critique viziers and compose satirical verses. The truth?
as always, likely rests somewhere between the foam and the grounds. Shaheen continues, now halfway through a tale involving janissaries, forbidden scrolls, and a secret blend of beans said to be roasted over desert fire. You polish the lip of a brass tray, letting him hold court. Occasionally, other patrons glance over and smile, indulgent but entertained. Nobody corrects him. That would break the spell. The younger couple from earlier lingers by the window, sketchbook still open. The man draws the carved spoon handles. The woman writes in a small notebook, occasionally peeking at the calligraphy on the wall. You don't interrupt them. Tourists may come and go, but the good ones, the ones who slow down, deserve your quiet. At this hour, you sometimes think of your father. He was the one who taught you the rhythm of brewing, the small gestures, the patience, the difference between a hurried boil and a whispering one. You remember how he used to press the sesve against his ear, listening for that first sigh of foam. It breathes before it bubbles, he would say, just like people. He passed many years ago, but you still keep his favorite cup on the shelf, chipped and stained. No one uses it. It's part of the room now, like the scent of cardamom that never quite leaves your apron. There's a lull in Shaheen's voice. You glance up. He's gazing at the ceiling now, as if awaiting divine inspiration for the next chapter. You offer him a refill. He declines with a regal wave, claiming that more would dilute the legend. You hide your smile. You use the quiet moment to sweep the hearth again, gathering ash into the corner with short strokes. The coals are still warm, but you add a few small twigs, watching the fire spark back to life with a low sigh. It's alive, just like you, never quite still, never fully asleep. In the doorway, a shadow flickers. A girl enters, no older than 12, balancing a small basket on her hip. She approaches shyly, eyes darting toward the basin. You know her, Layla, daughter of the seamstress down the street. She never says much, just collects 2 small cups of sweetened coffee and disappears again, off to deliver them to her mother and grandfather. You pour without asking, add the sugar cubes, wrap the cups in a cloth, and hand her the bundle. She curtsies. You nod. No words needed.
This was once common practice. Messenger children ferrying coffee between homes and shops, wrapped carefully to avoid spills, balancing trays like acrobats. In fact, some claim that's how love letters were exchanged, hidden beneath saucers or tucked into napkins. Historians still argue whether this was true or just a romantic flourish added later. You'd like to believe it's true. It makes the world feel softer. As Layla vanishes into the sunlit street, you refill your own cup, this time with just foam and a splash of rosewater, your private indulgence. You sip slowly. The warmth unfurls in your chest, slow and velvety. The scent lingers longer than the taste. Your thoughts drift. You remember a story someone once told about an Ottoman scholar who refused to drink coffee because he believed it would make his soul too alert? He preferred water, he said, because it didn't try to outthink him. You imagine trying to explain espresso to that man and chuckle softly. You look around your shop, the fading tapestries, the jars of spice, the lazy flies circling near the citrus peel jar. It's not a grand place. It's not even particularly tidy, but it's yours. And every day, like clockwork, it fills with life. You rinse out another jezve, the inside already lined with a thin coating of oil and grit. It will take time to scrub, and you know you'll do it by lantern light later tonight, fingers pruny from soapy water and sandalwood paste. But you don't mind. Not really. The work is gentle, repetitive, predictable, and in this world, that's its own kind of wealth. Outside, the city has begun to sweat. You hear the sharp bark of the dog, the slap of sandals, the clinking of coin against metal as a cloth seller counts change. The haze of the midday sun makes the air waver, but inside, your walls hold the heat at bay, at least for now. You press your palms against the counter, stretch your back,
and listen to the crackle of fire, the sigh of Shaheen's final tale, the scratch of a pencil from the tourist's corner, the delicate chime of the water basin, the silence between sips. All of it, your coffee house symphony. And though your feet ache and your eyes sting from smoke and heat, you wouldn't trade it for anything. Because this is where time bends, where people breathe slower, where the world for a moment agrees to pause. And you're the keeper of that pause.
The hours drift forward, though you'd be hard-pressed to say how many have passed. The shadows are longer now, still subtle, but their slant tells you everything. The heat has settled into the bones of the city, humming gently in the plaster, warming the handles of your chezvez, coaxing the last drops of sweat from your brow. It's the part of the day where everything moves a little slower, where even the pigeons stop arguing on the rooftop tiles and just puff up their feathers in surrender. You fan the coals lazily, a gentle flick of the wrist, just enough to keep the embers awake. The hearth gives off that familiar wood and oil scent, comforting in its consistency. You've grown to know each piece of wood by how it cracks, how it smells, how long it burns. There's an old superstition that says if your coffee hearth goes out during the day, your luck does too. You don't believe it, but you've also never let the fire go out. A boy stumbles in, breathless, not one you recognize. His clothes are plain, his sandals worn nearly flat. He clutches a thin cloth bundle to his chest and looks around, wide-eyed, as if entering a palace rather than your modest shop. You nod gently toward the corner cushion, and he lowers himself as though afraid the pillows might vanish. You bring him a small cup, plain, barely sweetened. He doesn't ask. You don't explain. That's the rhythm here. One gesture, one glance, and the work is done. You set the cup down on a chipped saucer and place a cube of sugar beside it. He stares at it as if you've just offered him a glimpse of paradise. And maybe for him, you have. He sips, winces, then sips again. You turn away to give him the dignity of his moment, and you refill the water basin. The trickle of the stream into the copper bowl is soothing, slow like the world is thinking before it speaks. You swish it gently, watching the light ripple across the surface. You remember your uncle used to read fortunes from water bowls, said it was more accurate than reading coffee grounds. Coffee lies, he used to say, but water? Water tells you everything. Historians still argue whether Ottoman coffee shops were places of quiet respite or centers of low-level rebellion. Some describe them as homes for the thoughtful, where poets whispered verses under their breath. Others accuse them of fostering sedition, of harboring ideas too bold for polite society. You suppose both could be true. You've heard more than your share of quiet grumbling and soft-spoken radicalism over the years. But today, no one is plotting. Today, it's just the hum of a city exhaling.
You glance over and notice the boy still holding the cloth bundle in his lap. Curiosity gets the better of you. "Delivery?" you ask, softly. He nods. "For the calligrapher down the street," he says. "Ink and brushes." You nod and return. You know the one, old Musa, who never speaks above a whisper and always smells faintly of cedar and vinegar. You remember that he used to come here once, years ago, before his hand began to tremble. He said the coffee steadied him. Perhaps it did. Or perhaps he just liked the excuse to sit quietly for an hour with the scent of cardamom curling around him. You pour a second cup for the boy. On the house. He tries to refuse, but you wave him off. Calligraphy's thirsty work, even when you're only carrying it. He smiles then, small, quick, like he's not sure he's allowed to, and cradles the cup in both hands like it's a precious thing. Maybe it is. You return to your counter. A merchant ambles by the open window, hawking citrus peels dipped in honey. The scent is sharp and cheerful, and for a moment you wonder if you should buy a few to offer customers. Then you remember the last time you brought something new into the shop. A ceramic hookah, painted in indigo and gold. It cracked within a week. Superstition maybe, or just clumsy fingers. Either way, you've grown cautious about change. Still, something about the citrus lingers in your mind. A soft cough draws your attention. The door creaks, and in walks one of your favorite regulars, Gulizar Hanım, an elderly woman with the posture of a queen and the glare of a hawk. She wears all black, always, and she carries a black parasol indoors, no matter the light. She claims the sun has opinions, and she'd rather not hear them. You set out her cup before she even reaches the counter. No sugar, extra hot, with a sprig of mint. She doesn't thank you. She just nods once and lowers herself onto her favorite cushion, second from the back, next to the wall, beneath the painting of the camels. She never faces the window. She pulls out her embroidery, as she always does, and begins to stitch. You've never asked what she's working on, though over the years you've seen birds, stars, flowers, and once, curiously, a donkey holding a teacup. That one made you laugh for days.
The boy has finished his coffee. He stands, nods, and offers a quiet thank you. You give him a small paper cone filled with roasted chickpeas. He looks surprised, then delighted. You wave him off before he can offer a blessing or a tear. There's no need. Outside, the shadows stretch longer still, a prelude to the cooling air of evening. Inside, the lighting has taken on that golden quality, just soft enough to make everything seem a little older, a little more sacred. You light a small oil lamp in the corner, just to chase away the deepening shade. Gulizar's needle moves in perfect time with the ticking of the old wall clock, its wooden pendulum swaying with theatrical indifference. You sip your own cup now, bitter, earthy, the taste of the day collecting on your tongue. You savor it. A tiny lizard skitters across the windowsill. It pauses, watches you, then disappears behind the curtain. You wonder if it's the same one from last week. You've named it Marat. He seems agreeable. You think, briefly, about all the things you never expected this job to involve. Naming lizards, decoding the moods of elderly women through embroidery, sketching with charcoal, dodging the occasional political argument disguised as poetry, learning which patrons talk to themselves and which ones expect a reply. And yet, here you are. You glance at the hearth again. The coals have dimmed slightly, but they're still alive. You shift the logs with practiced care. The fire responds with a soft puff of sparks. In a nearby district, there's a coffee seller who uses a bell to signal fresh brew. You've never liked that. Too abrupt, too needy. If someone wants your coffee, they'll come. If they don't, the fire still burns and the day still passes. Gulizar finally speaks, her voice dry as parchment. Too quiet today. You shrug. Sometimes the city breathes in. She snorts. Let's hope it exhales gently. You both chuckle at that. It's a rare moment, but you savor it. A cat slinks in through the back door, tail high, as though it owns the place. It probably does. It hops onto the ledge by the window and surveys its domain with bored disdain. You toss it a scrap of bread. It ignores you. Typical. And still, the coffee flows. You pour another cup, for no one in particular, just to keep the rhythm. Because this blend of silence, motion, breath, and memory is what makes your shop what it is. And you are its quiet guardian. You lean against the wooden frame of the open doorway, the edge worn smooth from years of palms resting just where yours now lies. Outside, the air is changing. There's a softness in it, a gradual lifting of heat, like the earth exhaling after holding its breath all afternoon. Somewhere nearby, a breeze picks up, carrying with it the scent of roasted nuts, charcoal smoke, and that faint, metallic tang of the Bosphorus on the wind. Evening is slowly stretching its fingers across the city. Inside, the rhythm holds. Gulizar Hanım has finished her embroidery for now. She folds the cloth delicately as though it's a map to something secret and tucks it back into her bag. Her parasol, despite having served no apparent purpose today, remains perched beside her like a loyal dog. She rises with a grunt, offers you a nod sharp enough to cut glass, and sweeps from the shop without a word, just the way she prefers it. You'll see her again tomorrow, or the day after, or whenever the mood strikes her.
You wipe down her cushion with a damp cloth, not out of necessity, but habit, and smooth the folds of the rug. A brass cup rattles softly on its saucer as you adjust the table, and the sound reminds you of a younger version of yourself, nervous, anxious to please. Back when you'd measure every ingredient twice and still worry it wasn't quite right. Back when you thought each cup had to be perfect. Now you know, perfection isn't the goal, familiarity is. That's what people crave when they step through your door. Not the world's best coffee necessarily, though you're flattered when they say so. What they really want is a moment that feels like it belongs to them. A sigh in ceramic form. A conversation with no stakes. A glance across a room that means, I know you're tired too. Historians still argue whether the rise of Ottoman coffee culture was a social revolution or merely a fashionable indulgence. Did it reshape urban life, drawing people into new forms of community and dialogue? Or did it simply give bored merchants somewhere to sit and avoid their wives? Probably a little of both. You've witnessed your share of both ends of that spectrum, from intellectual debates to dramatic lovers' quarrels, all with a jezve bubbling quietly nearby. The younger couple is still there, though their sketchbook has been set aside now, and they've started whispering over the rim of their cups, heads close together, fingers lazily tracing rings in the condensation on the glass. You don't interrupt. You suspect they don't even realize the sun has begun to set. A low, rhythmic beat begins somewhere up the street. Maybe a tambourine, maybe just the slap of a basket against the vendor's hip. Either way, it pulses gently, like the city's heartbeat has shifted tempo. In the fading light, the outlines of the domes and minarets grow softer, hazier, as though the city itself is letting go of its sharp edges for the night. A man enters. He's older, his beard dyed a suspiciously youthful shade of black, his gait deliberate. You know this one too, Kadir Bey, retired tailor, amateur philosopher, full-time backgammon enthusiast. He doesn't speak right away, just gives you that solemn nod of his and lowers himself into the corner seat, the one with the dent from his own repeated visits. You bring him as usual, strong, unsweetened, thick enough to stand a spoon in, and the small backgammon board he stores behind your counter. You set it up in front of him and place a piece on the opening square, just the way he likes. He plays alone now. His former opponent, Hassan, passed away last spring. They used to meet every Thursday, rain or shine, and argue over the rules like it was the fate of the empire on the line. Now Kadir just mutters moves to himself, sometimes pausing to scowl at the empty seat across from him. You'd offer to play, but he's never accepted. Says he only plays against worthy ghosts. So you let him be. The fire needs attention again. You kneel by the hearth, stoking the embers gently with an iron poker. A flicker of flame curls around the kindling, licking the edge of a pine log with lazy hunger. The scent is sharp, clean, almost sweet. You close your eyes and breathe it in, letting it mingle with the coffee-saturated air until your mind wanders. You think of the stories your grandmother used to tell about how some coffee sellers in the old days were also considered healers or fortune tellers. They knew how to read not just the grounds in the cup, but the way a person held their spoon, the tilt of their breath, the rhythm of their sips. She used to say, if you want to know someone's soul, don't ask their name. Watch how they drink their coffee. You've done just that for years now, and you've learned that some people stir before sipping. Some don't. Some drink from the same side of the cup every time. Others rotate it slightly with each sip, like a compass trying to find true north. You've seen heartbreak in the foam, loneliness in the silence between cups, hope in the request for a second round. Backgammon pieces clack softly as Kadir makes another move. You hear a mutter under his breath, something about fate being a sore loser, and then a laugh, dry but genuine. You pour yourself a small cup, this time dusted with a pinch of clove. It reminds you of winter, of long nights when the wind howled against the shutters and you and your father would sit in silence, wrapped in wool and thought. The clove hits your tongue with a slight sting, then melts into warmth. A strange comfort.
From outside comes the cry of a muezzin calling the faithful to the evening prayer. The sound rolls gently over the rooftops, slipping into the shop like a familiar guest. The couple by the window stirs, gathering their things. They leave a few coins and a note, probably a sketch, maybe a thank you, and step out quietly, fingers intertwined. You let the note sit for a moment before retrieving it. A drawing, as expected, of you, standing behind the counter, jezve in hand, steam rising. A few stylized lines, and your whole world captured in charcoal. You chuckle. You've been drawn worse. You pin it to the board in the back, beside other sketches, scribbles, and crumpled poems. Your unofficial archive. A visual memory of the lives that have passed through your little sanctuary. Some of them you remember clearly, some not so much, but the feeling remains. A sparrow hops in through the open door, pecks at a breadcrumb near the leg of a stool, and flutters out again, unimpressed. You wonder if it was Murat the lizard's distant cousin. They seem to share an attitude. The shop is quieter now. Even the city seems to have lowered its voice. You tidy the cups, wipe the counters, arrange the tins of cardamom, cinnamon, nutmeg. Each has its place, and placing them there feels like restoring some tiny fragment of order to the world. You hang a fresh cloth over the side of the basin. The smallest details matter. They always have. Kadir finishes his game, sets the pieces carefully in their pouch, and stands. He offers you a rare smile. "I won," he says. You nod. Of course you did. And he leaves as quietly as he came, footsteps disappearing into the dusk. You're alone now, but not lonely, because soon the lamps will be lit, and the night crowd will arrive, with their stories, their silences, their sleepy smiles and restless hearts. And you'll be ready, with coals that still glow and cups that still wait to be filled.
The last threads of sunlight fray against the rooftops, dissolving into a lavender haze. You light the first oil lamp with a long taper, careful not to tilt it too much. Last week you almost singed your sleeve, and your eyebrows still haven't forgiven you. The soft glow spills out onto the counter, wrapping everything in a buttery golden hue. The brass spoons glint. The coffee grounds in the open jar take on a rich, earthy shimmer. Shadows stretch long and sleepy across the floor. The night shift has begun. It's a quiet transition, barely noticeable unless you know what to look for. The pace slows, the chatter softens, and the people who enter now are different from the morning crowd. These are the thinkers, the lingerers, the ones not in a rush to be anywhere. Some will stay for hours. Others will nurse a single demitasse in contemplative silence. The coffee you serve them isn't just a drink. It's a companion for whatever thoughts refuse to be dismissed. A tall man in a navy cloak appears in the doorway. His name is Halim, though you rarely hear it spoken aloud. He is known instead by the peculiar title, the Whisperer, not because he speaks softly, he doesn't, but because he collects secrets the way bakers collect flour, in great clouds that settle over everything. No one knows his real trade. Some say he's a retired bureaucrat. Others claim he was once an assassin. You think he just likes the way mystery fits on him like a tailored coat. You pour his coffee without asking. No sugar, a pinch of black pepper, and a drizzle of date molasses. Strange, yes, but somehow it works. You learned long ago not to question the combinations people crave. They're not always about taste. Halim takes his usual corner seat, nods once, and unfolds a notebook filled with tiny, scratchy writing. He doesn't speak, but every now and then he looks up and blinks slowly, as if storing your image in some invisible archive. You wonder what story he's spinning tonight, hopefully one where you survive the ending. Not long after, the door creaks open again, and a breeze snakes through, cool, sharp, smelling faintly of fish, ink, and roasted chestnuts. A trio of students shuffle in, their robes dusty, scrolls spilling from their sleeves, eyes bright with too many ideas and not enough sleep. You've seen them before. One's always half awake, one always loudly wrong, and the third looks perpetually on the edge of inventing a new form of mathematics.
They collapse at a table near the hearth, arguing in overlapping voices about celestial rotation, tax policy, and whether coffee counts as a meal. You bring them a tall brass tray filled with mismatched cups, sweet for the sleepy one, bitter for the loud one, and cinnamon dusted for the one who hasn't blinked in 5 minutes. They thank you in unison, barely noticing your smile. You like their presence. They remind you of fireflies, tiny, glowing, chaotic, and full of light they don't quite know how to carry. Historians still argue whether Ottoman coffee houses truly served as schools without walls, as one romantic 17th century writer once put it, or if that's just revisionist nostalgia. It's possible both are true. Ideas did flow here, through lectures, performances, whispered conversations, but so did gossip, poetry, and more than a few jokes involving sheep and viziers. And in your little shop, all of it still happens. The street beyond is quieter now. A cart rolls past, its wooden wheels groaning under a stack of oranges and pomegranates. You hear the faint whistle of a boy trying to imitate a nightingale. He's been practicing for days, bless him, and has only just figured out the coo part. Somewhere a dog barks once and gives up immediately. You refill the water basin. It's a ritual, more than a necessity at this point. You dip your hands in the cool water, swish it gently, and let the sound settle into the silence like a lullaby. The basin is cracked at the rim, but you've sealed it so many times with wax and cloth that it now looks like a bandaged soldier, stubbornly refusing to retire. You think of replacing it sometimes, but then again, you think of a lot of things and never quite do them. A new presence enters, soft footsteps, hesitant breath. She's young, face half covered by a veil, eyes wide, but not frightened. She carries a stack of small parcels wrapped in linen. When she speaks, her voice is like paper rustling. Is this the place where my father used to come? You nod slowly. You know who she means. You remember her father, Yusuf, elderly, gentle, always brought dates to share. Sat in the far corner every Thursday evening, played chess with himself, then left without a word. You hadn't seen him in months. Now you know why. You clear a space for her at the same table. She sets down the parcels, small bundles of herbs, bits of dried fruit, and a single letter, sealed but unsent. She doesn't cry. She just looks around the room, like she's trying to feel something of him in the worn chairs and polished spoons. You bring her a cup, Yusuf's favorite mix, medium roast, a swirl of honey, no foam. She wraps her hands around it like it's a lifeline. You step away. Some grief prefers to sit alone. You return to your own small cup. Tonight, you've added a slice of dried orange peel and a sprinkle of crushed clove. The flavor is bold, sharp, like biting into a memory. It wakes your tongue and reminds you that night doesn't mean silence. It just means another kind of listening.
Across the room, the students have begun drawing diagrams on the table with spilled sugar. One is attempting to explain planetary orbits using olives. It's not going well, but it's going loud. In the background, Halim flips a page in his notebook and scribbles something. The girl sips quietly. The night deepens. You glance toward the ceiling where the lanterns sway slightly with each gust. The shadows dance in familiar ways, and the room feels smaller, warmer, like the belly of a ship gently rocking in the sea of thought and steam. You take this moment to step outside. The street is calm, washed in silver moonlight. The bricks under your feet still hold the memory of the day's heat. Across the way, a neighbor is closing up shop, his shutters creaking like old knees. He waves. You nod. No words. You re-enter your cafe and let the door sigh shut behind you. There's peace here. Not the loud, celebratory kind, but the quiet peace that smells of roasted beans and old wood. The kind of peace that builds one slow cup at a time, until it becomes a place, a ritual, a memory stitched into the fabric of someone's life. You return to your post behind the counter just as one of the students knocks over an olive. It rolls, bounces, and somehow lands in Halim's cup. He looks down, then looks up. I suppose the universe wanted me to eat this, he says dryly. You stifle a laugh. The students freeze, wide-eyed. But Halim just smiles, plucks the olive out, and pops it into his mouth. The laughter that follows is small, scattered, but real. And in that moment, with the coals glowing, the coffee cooling, and the moonlight nudging its way across the floorboards, you feel it again. The comfort of repetition, the beauty of small things done well, and the strange, sleepy magic of a world that moves in time with the pour of your hand.
The clock you don't own ticks somewhere in the background, its rhythm carried not by gears, but by the endless, familiar rituals of your cafe. The hiss of water reaching its second boil, the clink of brass cups settling onto worn saucers, the slow exhale of a guest who hasn't said a word in over an hour. You don't need a watch here. Time keeps itself, like a cat curled behind the stove, stretching only when it wants to be noticed. You walk slowly past each table, not as a server, but as a gardener checking in on his plants. A glance, a nod, a refill if the angle of a cup suggests thirst. The regulars barely notice you now. And you? Well, you've learned to measure a soul's weather by the swirl in their coffee grounds. The fire in the hearth has mellowed into a soft, red cradle of embers. You crouch beside it, reaching for the little chest of wood chips you keep hidden under a cloth near the broken tile. You select the strip of cherry wood, not because it's the most efficient, but because it smells faintly of summer. You place it in the flame and watch the smoke twist upward, thin and ribbon-like, curling into stories you'll never write down. Tonight, you're thinking of the boy with the green turban. He first appeared 3 winters ago, shy and skittish, barely tall enough to see over the counter. His name was Ottoman. He sold roasted chickpeas from a brass tray, shouting rhythmically in the market square until his voice cracked like a twig. You'd given him a cup of warm milk once, flavored with cloves since you were out of sugar, and you'd stared at it like it might explode. From then on, he came often. Never sat, never stayed long, but always curious. He'd ask questions, too many sometimes. Why do some cups have a gold rim? Why do men whisper when they sit by the window? How long does it take to learn the perfect foam? You didn't always have answers, but you let him watch. He hasn't been around in a while. You assume life's pulled him elsewhere. Or perhaps he's become a seller of something new, a street poet or a thief of stories. Maybe one day he'll walk in again, a man now, with a voice that doesn't crack and hands that remember how you turned the Sevsve without looking. Historians still argue whether children like Osman were exploited in Ottoman urban centers or whether they were integral members of an informal communal economy. Some records suggest they worked in harsh conditions. Others say they thrived on independence and street-earned wisdom. The truth, like always, may lie in the steam rising from a single shared cup. Back in the present, your eyes catch the flicker of a scarf in the doorway. A man enters, dressed in pale linen, his sandals dusty from travel. His eyes are tired, but kind. He scans the room once, then walks directly toward the low table near the back wall, the one with the carved tulip pattern, barely visible unless the lamplight hits just right. You don't recognize him, but he moves with the calm certainty of someone who's been here before, in another season, perhaps even in another life. You bring him a cup, unasked. Light roast, no sugar. He sips, closes his eyes, and hums approvingly. When he speaks, it's not to you, but to the air. My grandfather used to sit here. He said this place never changed. You pause in your step.
You remember an old man who sat in that corner long ago, always wore a hat indoors, said coffee shouldn't be consumed in silence, but that silence could sometimes be brewed with coffee. You wonder if this man carries that same thought in his veins, passed down like a recipe with no measurements. You smile and return to your work. The students have gone. The room feels lighter without their sugar diagrams and olive debates. The whisperer is still writing, though now his pages look more like maps than sentences. He draws concentric circles and tiny figures, perhaps cities, or perhaps coffee cups connected by roads of ink. The young woman, Layla, has moved to the shelf where you keep the community book. It's nothing fancy, just a weathered journal where patrons leave poems, sketches, and the occasional dramatic breakup letter disguised as a philosophical treatise. She runs her fingers over the cover, then opens it and begins to write. You don't watch her words. Some things are meant to remain between ink and page. You return behind the counter and begin the slow ritual of cleaning, not because anyone asked, and not because it's messy, but because it's what you do at this hour. The sezviz are lined up, their handles blackened with use. You scrub them gently with salt and lemon like your father showed you. Not too hard, just enough to coax the shine beneath. The smell is sharp, citrusy, clean. You hum a tune your grandmother once sang while shelling pistachios. You don't know the words, only the rhythm. You pause now and then to glance at the room. Two elderly men have entered, playing chess in the corner without speaking. Their board is a cloth marked with charcoal, their pieces a mismatch of stone and bone. One of them gestures for tea instead of coffee. You oblige. Not every ritual requires beans. Historians still argue whether chess was considered too secular for coffee houses sponsored by religious endowments. Some sources insist it was banned. Others suggest it was quietly tolerated so long as wagers weren't involved. Either way, the game is here, now, unfolding one click at a time in the glow of your lamps. Outside, the moon is high, the air has cooled. You hear the soft sweep of a broom from a neighbor's doorway. A cat darts past, chasing nothing in particular. You light one more lamp. It's the one above the doorway, a faded bronze piece shaped like a tulip, passed down from a cousin who used to run a sweet shop near the Spice Bazaar. It always flickers once before settling, as though remembering every night it has ever illuminated. The room feels complete now. Full, but not crowded. Warm, but not hot. Quiet, but never quite silent. You take your place behind the counter and sip the last of your cup. The coffee has gone cold, but it still holds the memory of warmth. You swirl it once, then let the grounds settle. Everything does, eventually. And as the candles burn lower, and the coals glow deeper, and the pages in Halim's notebook inch toward their mysterious conclusion, you sit with your hands folded on the counter, not waiting, just being. Because in this cafe, time doesn't demand action, It simply asks you to notice.
The night has deepened into that peculiar stillness where sound becomes suggestion. Footsteps seem muffled by the shadows, and distant noises, like a door closing 3 streets over, or the clink of a spoon from the next block, arrive faded and weightless, as if sleep itself has begun to lower a blanket over the entire city. You lean against the worn wooden counter, arms folded, eyes half closed. The scent in the room has shifted subtly, less of roasted grounds and more of glowing coals and citrus oil. Someone dropped a bit of orange peel into the ashtray earlier, and now it perfumes the air like memory dressed in silk. It's the hour when coffee becomes a kind of spell work. Not a stimulant anymore, but a comfort. Not an alertness, but a letting go. The guests who remain, fewer now, don't speak so much as murmur. There's a rhythm to it, this quiet conversation, like paddles dipping gently into the water of a shared boat ride through a night that stretches timeless. You prepare another tsezve, this time for yourself. You measure the grounds carefully, one heaped spoon, then another, because tonight calls for a little extra courage. The water is added next, cold from the clay jug. And then your favorite part, the spices. A bit of cardamom, of course, a pinch of nutmeg, and, just to test the universe's sense of humor, a single clove ceremoniously dropped like a coin into a wishing well. As you swirl the mixture with the long-handled spoon, the steam rises in elegant spirals. Not rushing, never rushing. You place it gently over the flame, watching as the surface begins to tremble. Bubbles form at the edges first, shy and hesitant. Then the foam creeps upward, thick and golden. You remove it just in time, because that's the art, isn't it? To catch something at the edge of boiling, not too soon, not too late. Historians still argue whether the froth on Ottoman-style coffee was truly essential or merely aesthetic. Some say it was a sign of a skilled preparer. Others claim it was mostly decorative, a flourish for nobles with too much time. But for you, the foam is a whisper that says, "This was made with care." You pour the coffee into a small porcelain cup, rimmed with blue enamel. The handle is chipped, but you like it that way. You hold it to your lips and pause, not to sip yet, but to feel the warmth against your skin. The aroma fills your chest before it ever touches your tongue. And then, a sip. Bold, bitter, perfect.
Just then, the door opens once more, and a gust of air follows it in. It carries with it the scent of lavender, leather, and distant rain. A woman steps inside, draped in indigo cloth embroidered with tiny stars. Her earrings catch the lamplight and toss it back as glimmers on the wall. She's holding a basket, not large, but clearly heavy. You recognize her, the herb seller from the edge of the market, the one who never haggles and always adds extra time when she sees you. Tonight her smile is soft but tired. She approaches the counter and places the basket down with a sigh. "I have too much," she says simply. "You feed mines, I feed pots. Let's trade." Inside the basket, dried sage, lavender buds, something that might be dried rose hips, and several sealed glass jars labeled in a script you can barely read. In return, you offer her a fresh cup, mild roast, 2 spoons of honey, and a floating cardamom pod. She drinks it slowly, leaning against the far wall, eyes closed. No conversation, just mutual restoration. You tuck the herbs behind the counter. You'll use them in the morning, perhaps, or maybe never. Some things are meant to be kept like talismans. Nearby, the two chess-playing elders are now deep in their game, grumbling softly in a dialect that even you only half understand. They don't argue exactly, they editorialize. Every move is accompanied by a proverb, a sigh, or a suspicious look. The board now features a pawn with a chipped corner pretending to be a queen. No one has corrected it. They've simply agreed to believe in her potential. You look over at Halim. Yes, he's still there. Of course he is. But something's changed. He's no longer writing. Instead, he's carefully folding one of the pages into a small square, then tucking it into the spine of the community book. A secret message? A joke? A forgotten recipe for lentil stew? You'll never know unless someone spills tea on that page someday. The young woman, Layla, is now sketching on the blank back of a receipt. It looks like a window, or perhaps a door, or maybe the frame of something you can't see yet. Your cafe has always drawn these kinds of people. Quiet dreamers, loud philosophers, street magicians in disguise, and poets who don't know they're poets. Maybe it's the scent of coffee, or the tilt of the chairs, or maybe it's just that your door creaks in a particularly welcoming way. Historians still argue whether Ottoman coffeehouses were truly centers of radical thought or simply places where men avoided house chores for hours on end. Some documents show the authorities considered them breeding grounds for sedition. Others show they were praised as vital arteries of urban civility. But here, in your little cafe, there's room for both rebellion and routine, sometimes in the same sip.
You return to your seat, watching as the firelight dances on the brass kettle. The shadows stretch longer now, more languid, as if even the walls have decided to rest. A moth flutters near the window, then another. You get up and gently guide them away from the flame, whispering a promise that you never keep. I'll leave the lamp off next time. But you won't, because there's always someone still coming, even now. Footsteps again, this time softer, more hesitant. A man peeks in, clearly unsure if you're open or not. You give a nod, and he steps inside, clutching a scroll wrapped in cloth. He sits in the corner and unwinds the bundle. A musical instrument, small, stringed, with delicate wooden pegs. He tunes it silently, plucks a few notes, then pauses. You bring him coffee, plain and dark. He sips, then plays. The melody is unfamiliar, slow, full of space. It hangs in the air like incense, curling through the beams, nestling into corners, weaving between conversations. No one speaks, not even the chess players. For a few minutes, your cafe becomes a concert hall made of brick, memory, and the hush of hearts listening. The tune ends on a note so soft, you're not sure it ever happened. He nods once and places the instrument back in its cloth. No applause, no thanks, just a shared breath. And then, silence again. You clean a few empty cups, stack a few plates, wipe down the counter with a cloth that smells faintly of lemon. Your hands move without thought, muscle memory guided by years of repetition. You glance around. Layla is asleep now, head resting on her arms. Halim is gone. The chess game has ended without a winner, or maybe both claimed victory and went home satisfied. The herb seller has left a single jar behind, labeled simply, "For quiet mornings." And you remain. Not because you must, but because this hour, the one between midnight and memory, is the hour you were made for. The flame burns low. You breathe in the last of the coffee scent. You let it settle inside you like an echo.
and the night, sweet and unhurried, continues to unfold itself.
Outside, the breeze has turned colder, sharper. You notice it only when the door creaks open again and lets in a ribbon of night air. It curls around your ankles like a curious cat before disappearing beneath the tables. You glance up, expecting to see another late arrival, but no one's there. Just the door, swung half open by the wind, and the faint echo of shoes on distant cobblestones. The city, it seems, still breathes, even when most of its inhabitants have drifted into dreams. You walk over and close the door gently, placing the carved stone at its base to keep it sealed. The sound of the latch sliding back into place is oddly satisfying, like drawing a line under a sentence you finally finished writing. You turn back to the cafe. Stillness. Only a few guests remain now. They don't speak, and you don't expect them to. This hour tends to draw in the silent ones, the ones who carry stories so heavy they're afraid to speak them aloud in case they fall apart. One of them is sitting beneath the wall where old copper trays hang, worn smooth by years of polishing, and the occasional thud of someone knocking into them mid-gesture. He has his hands wrapped around his cup like it's a prayer. You refill the water jug. You rearrange the spoons. You wipe down a spot on the shelf that didn't really need wiping. The rhythm of maintenance, you found, is its own kind of meditation. You've swept the floor so many times your body does it without asking. The broom becomes an extension of your thinking. And tonight, you're thinking about time. Specifically, how coffee sellers like you have danced with time for centuries. Not just hours and minutes, but seasons, cycles, repetitions. Each morning mirrors the one before it, and each evening folds gently into the next. Historians still argue whether Ottoman coffee sellers were true craftsmen or merely merchants capitalizing on a fad. Some chroniclers wax poetic about the skill needed to brew the perfect cup, while others insist it was all just a matter of boiling and pouring. You suspect both views miss the mark, because it's not about the technique, it's about the timing. Too soon, and the foam collapses. Too late, and the grounds burn. You've spent years mastering the balance, and not just with coffee, with people.
You can tell when someone wants conversation and when they want quiet, when a patron is lingering because they're enjoying themselves, and when they're lingering because they don't want to go home. You've learned how to fade into the background at the right moment, how to listen without seeming to eavesdrop, how to make eye contact that says, "I see you, but only if you want to be seen." Tonight, a man at the farthest table is drawing. You hadn't noticed him arrive, but there he is, back bent, hand moving steadily. From your spot behind the counter, you can't quite make out what he's sketching. A face, perhaps? Or a street? Or something completely imagined. His coffee is untouched. It's probably gone cold. You debate warming it again, but decide against it. Some people prefer it that way. You understand. Back in the early days of your trade, before you learned to listen, before you learned to wait, you would have asked him, interrupting his line, breaking his trance. You've since learned better. Silence, in a place like this, isn't absence. It's presence, stretched thin and sweet like molasses. The clock, your unofficial one, the oil lamp near the window, burns lower. It flickers twice, then steadies. You know that means it's past the hour when the bread sellers begin kneading their first batch. Somewhere in a kitchen tucked between alleyways, a woman is cracking eggs into flour and humming to herself. You take a moment and sit. Rare for you, but earned. Your chair creaks a little, as always. It's the same chair you've used since your very first morning, when your hands trembled pouring your first cup and you accidentally spilled hot grounds onto a merchant's lap. He laughed, told you the first burn is a blessing. You hadn't believed him then, but now, well, you've grown fond of the scars. You sip your own coffee, lukewarm now, with a film forming on the surface. You don't mind. It tastes like habit, and habit tastes like home. Across from you, the drawing man looks up. Do you still remember your first brew? He asks, not as a stranger, but like someone asking about a childhood friend. You nod. Too strong, bitter, but the foam was perfect. He smiles, the kind of smile that suggests he wasn't really asking about coffee. Then he returns to his sketch. Your thoughts wander again, this time to the street vendors who used to pass by your window every morning. You remember the one who sold pomegranates, his cart bright with red and gold, shouting prices so loudly you could hear him even with the shutters closed. He'd disappear every winter, then return like clockwork at the first sign of spring.
You wonder where he is now, or if someone else shouts in his place. Historians still argue whether Ottoman coffeehouses contributed to neighborhood identity or disrupted traditional trade patterns. Some claim they anchored communities. Others argue they stole foot traffic from local markets. But you remember sharing leftovers with that pomegranate man, trading him a shot of cardamom brew for a few overripe fruits. If that's disruption, it tasted delicious. A bell chimes softly above the door. Not because someone's entered, but because the wind has changed again. The flame in the corner lantern leans to the left. You get up, instinctively, and check the window. You close it slightly, not all the way, just enough to keep the chill from sneaking in too fast. In the process, you glance out. And there she is again, the woman with the silver scarf. She doesn't enter, not tonight. She just walks by, slow and steady. She always looks toward the cafe, but never quite at you. You wonder if she remembers the night she stayed until dawn, telling stories about her mother's cafe in Bursa, and how her father used to sneak extra sugar cubes to the guests. That was a winter evening, and her laugh had warmed the room better than any fire. You watch her go, her silhouette framed by the last lantern on the street. And just like that, the moment passes. You turn back. The man is gone, his drawing left behind. You approach it cautiously, as if touching it might erase the lines. It's your cafe. Not from today, from long ago. Before the tiles cracked, before the second shelf sagged. The front door is open in the drawing, and inside you see people you used to know. One of them is your mentor. Another is your younger self, standing crooked with nervous hands. You fold the paper slowly and place it behind the ledger, in the drawer where you keep things not meant for display. Letters, foreign coins, a broken coffee spoon from a guest who apologized too many times. You return to your seat. The flame dances lower still. One of the remaining guests lets out a soft snore. Another has his head tilted back, lips parted slightly, completely surrendered to the softness of this hour. You exhale. Your cafe doesn't need you right now. And for once, that feels like a gift.
The night, by now, has ripened into that velvety stillness that only cities half asleep can know. You can feel it settle on your skin like silk. The air neither cold nor warm, but perfectly neutral, like the silence between two dear friends who no longer need words. You stretch your legs behind the counter, the wooden floor creaking its approval beneath your soles. Somewhere, deep in the bones of the building, a pipe sighs. Your eyes drift toward the back wall of the cafe, where a small niche houses the oldest object in the room, an hourglass, permanently stuck mid-shift. The sand stopped flowing years ago, a fleck of something, possibly a dried fig seed, or perhaps the ghost of time itself clogging the neck. You left it there deliberately. It seemed fitting that time would stand still in a place like this. And speaking of time, tonight feels like one of those rare moments when the past quietly knocks on the back door, not to barge in, but to gently sit beside you and whisper, "Remember?" You do. You remember how coffee first came to Istanbul,
It wasn't a parade, despite what some stories say. No trumpets, no golden carafes, just a pair of Yemeni merchants in the 16th century, likely with sore feet and overfilled donkeys, bringing small sacks of beans with names no one could pronounce. Some say Sultan Suleiman's court embraced the drink at once. Others insist there was resistance, that religious scholars debated its moral standing, likening it to wine. And so began the great Ottoman coffee debate, stimulant or sin. Historians still argue whether the first public coffee house in Istanbul opened in 1554 or 1555. The records are charmingly inconsistent, as if even history was too caffeinated to sit still. What's more certain is that once it began, it spread like warmth on a cold morning. You lean on the counter now, tracing circles into the wood grain with your finger, imagining that first cafe, probably smaller than yours, dimly lit, smoky from the brazier, with a floor sticky from the endless tread of boots and sandals. Maybe they didn't even call it a coffee house yet. Maybe it was just that place with the good smell. But it grew, and with it came rituals, ceremony, conversation, a new kind of public life. It's not something you think about daily, but tonight it wraps around you like a familiar scent, like cardamom or fresh coal. You glance around and wonder, would those early patrons recognize this place? Would they be confused by the wall of mismatched teacups, or amused by the painting of a camel drinking espresso? You like to think they'd sit down anyway, that the brew would speak a language no generation forgets. You reach for the copper pot, your favorite Chesavi, the one with the slightly dented base that always seems to make the creamiest foam. As you rinse it, the water hums in the basin, echoing faintly. You work slowly, deliberately, every motion a quiet homage.
And then, the scent begins again. Coffee and clove, fire and brass. You brew a fresh pot, not for a customer, but for the room itself, a tribute. The liquid bubbles gently, rising like a sleepy volcano, then settles into a stillness that reflects the flicker of the oil lamp above. You pour carefully, dividing it into 3 small cups, one for yourself, one for the spirit of the room, and one for the ghosts you're not sure you believe in, but always considered during the late hours. As you sip, the warmth spreads outward, not just across your tongue, but through your limbs, your chest, the spaces between your ribs. You sink into a chair and close your eyes for just a moment. In your half-dream, the cafe changes shape. The walls are lower, the shelves fewer, the faces different. You're somewhere in the 17th century now, perhaps. The men around you are wearing embroidered caftans. The room smells more like tobacco and rosewater. Someone is playing a knee flute softly in the corner. There is a low hum of conversation, poetry, politics, plans for the next caravan departure. The coffee is thick and grainy, served in tiny cups no bigger than a walnut. One man stands up and recites a verse. Another counters with a proverb. Someone claps. It's not loud. It's never loud. But it pulses. This energy, this tether between hearts, brought together not by religion or trade, but by the need to sit and sip and share a piece of time. You open your eyes again, slowly. Back in the present. Sort of. It's still your cafe, but it's also theirs. Theirs and everyone's who ever stirred a cup with intent, who ever lingered past their welcome because the moment refused to end. A couple near the front has dozed off, their hands still clasped. You fetch a light shawl from the coat stand and drape it gently over their shoulders. They don't stir. Their breathing is slow, even. The street outside is silent now. Even the cats seem to have called it a night. You think of your mentor, who used to say that at a certain hour, the world stops expecting anything from you, and that is when you are truly free. You wandered toward the bookshelf, pulled down a volume at random. It's an Ottoman Turkish, flowing script, curlicued ink, impossible for most modern readers. But you know enough to make out the poem on the first page. It's about coffee, of course, about how a single cup can hold 1,000 intentions, how foam is the mirror of the soul, how silence, when shared with another, becomes music. You place the book gently back on the shelf. You step outside for a moment, just to breathe. The sky is a canopy of velvet, the stars faint but present. The cobbles are slick with dew. You pull your shawl closer and look down the street. Empty now, but somehow still alive. Like the city itself is holding its breath between dreams. The air smells of fig trees and faint coal smoke. You smile. Inside, the coffee waits, and as you re-enter, the bell gives its softest chime of the night, a reminder that the door swings both ways, that every leaving is a kind of return.
The door closes behind you with a sigh, and the silence inside the cafe folds back around you like a warm blanket. You pause near the entrance, soaking in the moment. The amber glow of lanterns, the soft crackle of the brazier, the rhythmic drip of a leaky faucet in the back. Nothing urgent calls your attention. The world, for now, is not in a hurry. Neither are you. You cross the floor slowly, passing tables that now feel more like landmarks than furniture. Each one has its story, you realize. The second table near the window, where a merchant once waited nervously for a letter from his daughter in Damascus. The one by the bookshelf, where a woman used to bring her caged canary and sing to it softly while sipping cardamom coffee. The far corner, where two young men scribbled love poems to girls they were too shy to speak to. You sit at your usual stool behind the counter. It's become your watchtower. From here, you see everything. When the breeze shifts, when someone adjusts their posture, when a regular enters pretending not to crave conversation, you know all the tells. You've memorized the quiet vocabulary of those who spend time without speaking. Your own hands are dry from the heat of the fire and constant handling of brass. You rub them with a little olive oil from the jar you keep beneath the sink. Old habit. Learned from your grandmother, who used to say, "If you can keep your hands gentle, the world will treat you kindly." Not always true, you found, but comforting nonetheless. You glance toward the back shelf, where the old balance scale sits, a relic from before digital measurements, before standardized portions. You still use it sometimes, mostly out of nostalgia. The weights are mismatched, some round, some square, one chipped at the edge like a missing tooth. They've been in your family for 3 generations, or was it 4? Historians still argue whether personal heirlooms like this truly tell the story of continuity or just reflect fragments of domestic pride. Either way, you like the way the scale wobbles slightly before it settles. It reminds you that balance is rarely perfect, but often enough. Tonight, with the city deep in slumber, your mind drifts toward the invisible thread that links you with other coffee sellers, past, present, imagined. There's the legend of the blind seller in Alexandria who brewed by sound alone and swore that the boil spoke to him in whispers. There's a woman in Skopje who added a single dried cherry to every pot and claimed it warded off bad dreams. And then there's your favorite, a young man in 18th century Sarajevo who taught his parrot to say "more sugar please" in Turkish, Bosnian, and French. Guests came just to hear it. The bird died fat and adored. Some stories are probably made up, but then again, so is most of memory. You reach for a cloth and begin polishing the copper samovar. It's already clean, but the motion feels necessary. Circular, meditative, like turning prayer beads. Outside, a distant rooster crows far too early. You smile. There's always one bird that misreads the moon. You wonder how different this hour must have felt during the height of the empire.
when coffee houses were teeming hubs of thought, music, and intrigue, when poets argued over couplets and janissaries plotted over steaming cups, when coffee was more than a drink, it was an act, a statement, a way of showing you belonged. Historians still argue whether coffee houses encouraged political dissent or simply gave people a place to gossip. There were bans, of course, sultans who feared too much caffeine bred revolution, but people kept coming, quietly, bravely, often at risk of punishment, because once a person learns to gather, learns to speak freely over warmth and steam, it's difficult to unlearn. You feel that, even now. Even if your cafe is a gentle shadow of what once was, it still carries the residue of resistance. Not loud, not dramatic, just persistent. A kettle whistles. The last of your guests has stirred. He stands, nods toward you without a word, and places a few coins gently on the counter. More than he owes. You nod back, your thanks silent. He exits slowly, as if reluctant to break the seal of the place. The door closes again. You are alone. And yet, you don't feel lonely. Instead, you feel suspended, between centuries, between cups. You prepare one more brew, this time for yourself. You measure with your hands, not the scale. You stir counterclockwise, the way your grandfather taught you. You wait for the boil to rise just once, not twice. You pour slowly, let the foam build, let it breathe. Then you carry it to the window seat, the one you rarely sit in. From there, you watch the sky begin to change. It's still night, but not quite. The stars seem hesitant, fading inch by inch. The street remains empty, though you can sense its anticipation. Morning is a promise just starting to whisper. And for coffee sellers, the whisper is always a call. You sip. You savor. You remember a time when you were young, when mornings were something to fear, when the rush of orders, the clang of pots, the stress of pleasing each patron felt like a test you weren't prepared for. But now? Now you relish the quiet before the storm, the seconds where the city is still dreaming and you are still the keeper of the flame. There's a rhythm to it, a music. Cloth over the table, coals in the stove, grind, pour, foam. The morning crew will be here soon. You'll greet them with sleepy smiles and strong coffee. You'll let them tease you about staying up all night again. You'll pretend to groan, but secretly, you'll enjoy it. Because this, right now, is yours. This moment of near morning stillness. This dance between yesterday and tomorrow. And as the first thread of light peeks over the rooftops, you take a final sip and whisper to the cup, "Thank you." Not for the caffeine, but for the company.
The sun has not yet risen, but you can already feel the shift. The stillness of the deepest night is softening into something lighter, thinner, more fragile. It's the breath before the exhale, the space between thoughts. You remain at the window seat, your coffee cooling beside you, watching the city stretch beneath its blanket of sleep. The first baker across the street has lit his oven. You see the faint orange flicker through the slatted shutters. A pigeon shuffles along the windowsill outside, peering at you with the suspicious air of a feathery inspector general. You raise your cup in greeting. The pigeon declines to respond. This, you know, is the moment when real coffee sellers begin to stir. Not the night owls who dabble in storytelling and slow pours by candlelight, like you. No, these are the early risers, the vendors who push carts through the alleyways, shouting their wares in voices that could wake the dead, or at least the hungover. They carry kettles strapped with worn leather belts and cups clinking like tambourines. Their routes are ritual, through the Hammam district, past the madrasa, across the spice bazaar, and always, always by the fishmongers just before dawn. You imagine them now, checking coals, tightening laces, folding cloths with reverence. The coffee is pre-brewed, often spiced with clove or cinnamon, kept warm by embers tucked into brass boxes. These are not cafes. These are coffee on wheels, fast, efficient, a miracle of Ottoman morning logistics. You've met a few of these vendors, back when you were young and curious, still trying to understand how the world of coffee worked outside your quiet little den. One man claimed he could tell the time by how many cups he'd served. Another refused to serve anyone who didn't smile at him first. A third insisted that the best way to sell coffee was to walk like a cat and sing like a rooster. You never understood that last one, but it stuck with you nonetheless. Historians still argue whether these mobile coffee vendors were an official part of the urban economy or just tolerated freeloaders on the edge of legality. What is clear, though, is that they became beloved. People would wait for their regular seller each morning, and if he didn't show, it was cause for concern, or at least mild gossip over breakfast. You sip again, now tepid, but still flavorful. There's something satisfying about coffee that's had a moment to settle, like it's gathered its thoughts before entering your bloodstream. You rise from the seat and begin your slow round of reopening rituals. Even though you haven't really closed, it's symbolic. Straightening the stools, refolding the tea towels, blowing the stray bits of husk and dust from the counter. A small spoon lies forgotten on the floor near the cupboard. You pick it up and smile. Probably dropped by the young student who was here yesterday, cramming for some exam on Ottoman calligraphy and forgetting everything else, including gravity.
You like these little remnants. They're proof that life has passed through. There's a tin container in the back with a label so faded it's illegible. You open it now, not because you need anything inside, but out of habit. It contains dried rose petals, once used in a blend you experimented with for a short time. Customers liked the scent, but found it too romantic, whatever that means. Still, you keep the petals. You suspect they help the other ingredients in the storage room feel more elegant by proximity. You begin grinding a fresh batch of beans. The sound is loud in the empty cafe, sharp and crunchy like footsteps on gravel. You use a hand-cranked mill, the kind that requires patience and a steady arm. There are electric options, of course, but you've always preferred the labor of the old way. It gives you time to think, or not to think. Both are valuable. As the grounds gather in the bottom of the brass cup, their aroma builds like a slow crescendo. Earthy, rich, almost chocolatey. It fills the air with purpose. You remember your first time preparing coffee for a real customer. Your hands were shaking. The sezve was too full. The foam boiled over. You served it anyway, and the man, bless him, pretended not to notice. He drank it all, left a tip, and said only, "Make it again tomorrow." That's how you learned that consistency, not perfection, is the heart of hospitality. You return to the brazier and light the fire once more. The coals are still warm. They accept the flame like an old friend. You place the sezve gently over the embers, watching as the mixture begins its slow dance. Tiny bubbles forming, the surface shivering like it remembers something. You let it rise once, then remove it. Let it settle. Repeat. The triple boil method is not required, but you like how it creates layers. As with people, so with coffee. The more time you give it, the more it reveals. You pour the first cup of the new day, not for a customer, for the house. It sits there, steaming softly on the countertop, like a lighthouse beacon welcoming in the dawn. Outside, the sky is beginning to blue, not quite light, but no longer dark. The threshold hour. You crack the door open to let in the breeze. It carries a medley of smells. Fresh bread from the baker, fish scales from the dock, early dew on stone. It's a fragrance only cities possess, a scent that cannot be bottled.
only remembered. You stand in the doorway, cup in hand, and watch the city's eyelids flutter open. A cart rumbles past, wheels complaining. A woman scolds a dog for some invisible crime. A boy pedals too fast down the slope, legs flailing. Life resumes. And here you are, a witness to it all. You are not the center of this world. You are its quiet border, the line where the sacred meets the ordinary. You take one last sip, set the cup down, and return inside. The cafe is ready. You are ready. Not because anything has changed, but because everything has.
The door opens with a creak, and right on time, your elderly regular enters. He nods once, says nothing, and settles into his usual seat. You greet him silently with the warmth of familiarity. As you prepare his coffee, you think about how much communication happens without words in a place like this. The raised eyebrow of someone asking for a refill, the tapping finger of someone impatient for sugar, the sigh of a student who just needs a quiet corner and a miracle. You bring the man his coffee, the chipped cup balanced precisely, and place it before him with reverence. He doesn't look up, but you catch the smallest twitch of his mustache. Approval, you suspect. You return to the counter, content. The morning rolls onward. More guests arrive in ones and twos. The postman, all flustered and dust-coated. 2 young women whispering behind delicate scarves. A traveling musician who pulls out a broken oud and begins tuning it with the patience of a monk and the skill of a goat herder. You give him a cup on the house, because anyone who can make beauty from broken things deserves caffeine. The cafe fills gradually, like a jug catching rainwater. Not rushed, just steady. You move among them like you've done for years, refilling water glasses, adjusting chairs, offering dates or slices of quince. You ask no questions unless prompted. Your job isn't to talk, it's to notice. And you do. You notice the student in the corner who switched pens 3 times but hasn't written a single line. You notice the woman whose smile doesn't reach your eyes today. You notice the man by the stove who finishes his coffee and turns the cup upside down, letting the grounds slide and stick. He stares into them, squinting, trying to read a future he hasn't yet earned. Coffee ground fortune-telling, tasseography, is an old practice, once banned, then tolerated, now mostly quaint. Historians still argue whether it was ever taken seriously or just used as an excuse to gossip, but you've watched enough people gaze into the residue to know it matters, not because the symbols are true, but because the act of looking for meaning is itself a kind of courage. You offer to read his cup, half joking. He laughs, shakes his head. You leave him be. Outside, the light has fully arrived, soft and golden. The shadow of the minaret cuts across the cobbles like an ancient sundial. The pigeons have convened again, squabbling over invisible crumbs. The city is now fully alive. But here, inside, the atmosphere is slower, quieter. Even as new guests arrive, the space holds its calm. You suspect that's what keeps people coming back. Not just the coffee, not even the comfort, but the permission to slow down. You've built something rare. A place where nothing screams for attention, where foam rises and settles at its own pace, where conversations bloom or wilt without pressure, where the clink of a spoon in a saucer can be the day's loudest noise. You move back behind the counter and pour yourself a small cup, not to drink, but just to hold. It's warm, grounding. You take a breath and let the scent fill your lungs. This is your rhythm. This is your quiet song. And you know, without a doubt, that the day will unfold just as it should.
You push the door gently closed, and the soft thunk it makes seems to echo slightly in the wooden bones of the building. The street is waking up now, full of half-shouts and clinking buckets, the squawk of overconfident seagulls, and that peculiar rhythmic creak of the shoemaker opening his awning by brute force and stubbornness alone. But in here,
In your little temple of coffee, everything is hushed once more. The first real customer will arrive soon, likely that same elderly man with the faded fez and the walking stick that clicks unevenly on the cobbles. He always sits by the middle pillar, drinks one thick cup of coffee with no sugar, and reads the same single page from the same crumpled newspaper folded into fourths. You suspect he no longer sees the print clearly, but reads from memory and habit. Still, you always bring the coffee in the same ceramic cup with the chip near the handle. He likes it that way. But before he arrives, you take a moment to appreciate the gentle swell of routine. The tin coffee cans on the back shelf are full, their lids snug. The sugar jar, only half full, but that's fine. Your supplier always comes by late on Mondays. The brazier is behaving well, its coals glowing red with the smugness of a fire that knows it's central to everything. Even the sink, which gurgled with discontent last week, has decided to remain peacefully silent this morning. A small miracle. You begin preparing the day's first round of serving trays. Each tray is its own minor puzzle. A cup, of course. A glass of water, always room temperature. A small napkin, folded into a triangle. And something sweet, if the guest is lucky, or if your mood leans toward generosity. Today, you decide to offer candied orange peel, carefully arranged in a brass bowl. The scent is slightly bitter, slightly floral, like the perfume of someone you've only met once but never forgotten. You set the bowl beside the cups, smile at its symmetry, then immediately rotate it 5 degrees counterclockwise. Much better. Outside, the murmur of the day continues to build. The muezzin's call drifts down from the hilltop, curling through the streets like a ribbon of sound. A woman walks past with 2 jugs of milk balanced across her shoulders on a yoke, and you marvel, not for the first time, at how gracefully she walks, like a cat performing arithmetic. Historians still argue whether Ottoman cafes were spaces of egalitarian refuge or exclusive enclaves for the elite. The truth, you think, probably lies somewhere in between. You've served fishermen who reeked of brine and silk-robed scholars who quoted Hafiz between sips. They all drink from the same cups. That's the magic. And the absurdity. You remember once, years ago, a nobleman's son came in wearing shoes that sparkled like wet fruit. He ordered coffee with honey, rosewater, and a pinch of saffron. You made it, of course. Who were you to argue? He took one sip, frowned, and declared it not sublime enough. You offered him a piece of walnut halwa. He accepted it with a sniff. Then, he left a coin larger than any you'd seen in months. You still don't know whether that moment was a success or a farce. Possibly both. You lean on the worn edge of the counter, the warmth of the sezva still radiating through your palm, and you watch as the morning slips quietly into late morning. It's not marked by a bell or a chime, but by subtle cues, the lazy lowering of voices, the slower shuffle of footsteps on the street, the way sunlight slants differently across the windows. You've always found this part of the day to be the gentlest, a sort of lull between the 2 acts of the daily performance. Across the room, the oud player strums a few tentative notes, not a song exactly, but something like one. A melodic shrug, soft and round. A small child claps. Someone near the back chuckles. And you, polishing the same brass spoon for the 3rd time, allow yourself a little smile. It's this sort of ambient harmony that makes the Ottoman coffee house so different from its modern cousins. Not quite cafe, not quite tavern, not merely a meeting place or a market stall. It's a blend, a hybrid of community and ritual, of routine and improvisation. Historians still argue whether these coffee houses were primarily political, social, or spiritual centers, but you suspect the answer is simply yes, all of it, and more. Of course, it wasn't always so peaceful. You recall an incident, some years ago now, when a heated debate broke out between 2 regulars. Not over politics, as one might expect, nor religion, nor even the quality of your cardamom beans. No, the argument centered around poetry, specifically whether a certain verse attributed to Fuzuli had actually been written by Baki. The debate grew so animated that teacups were nearly overturned and napkins were weaponized. You remember it clearly because you just replaced the tablecloths that morning. Eventually, the two men declared a temporary truce, ordered more coffee, and returned the next day with dog-eared anthologies as proof of their claims. The argument resumed for 3 weeks, then vanished forever. That's how it often goes. The tensions of the world play out here in miniature, condensed, translated into laughter or silence, sometimes into spilled sugar. You return to your duties, clearing a table where a pair of merchants just departed. They left behind half a date, 2 sticky spoons, and the faint smell of orange blossom. You clean methodically, folding the linen, wiping the surface, setting the cup aside. It's a quiet choreography you've perfected over time. No wasted steps, no sudden movements. A young woman enters. You notice her instantly, not because she's loud or extravagant, but because she hesitates at the doorway. First-time visitors always do. There's a sort of sacred pause before crossing the threshold, as if the room itself holds its breath in greeting. You incline your head. She steps forward.
She chooses a seat near the window. Good light, moderate noise, just far enough from the stove to remain cool. You admire the choice. She pulls out a folded page from her satchel and begins to write, brow furrowed. You prepare her coffee with particular care. Medium roast, no spice, 1 sugar cube, just a hunch. When you serve it, she looks up, surprised. You read minds too? She asks. You don't answer, just smile and walk away. Moments like these aren't dramatic. They're not the kind of stories that end up in textbooks or legends, but they're the soft heartbeats of the cafe, the small, quiet truths of human connection. In this place, everyone gets to be just a little bit more themselves. A few stools down, 2 men play backgammon. The sharp click of the dice and the soft thud of the pieces like punctuation in a drowsy sentence. One mutters a curse, the other grins. You bring them mint tea. They didn't ask, but you know the game goes better with it. They nod in thanks, without looking up. In the corner, someone dozes off. You let them. The rhythm of the room is slower now, more horizontal than vertical. If earlier the cafe was a river, now it's a pond, still water, reflective, slightly fragrant. You take this chance to sit down. Not for long, just a minute. You ease into the chair, tilt your head back slightly, and let your eyes close halfway. You can hear everything. The scratch of a quill, the rustle of paper, the clink of porcelain, the far-off call of a fruit seller pushing his cart down the alley. And underneath it all, the gentle burble of water heating in the kettle, like a lullaby sung by steam. You think about your first days here, how everything felt enormous, every customer a mystery, every mistake a disaster, how your hands shook when measuring out the beans, afraid you'd ruin it. You remember how long it took to learn the difference between a full boil and a friendly simmer, between waiting too long and just right. Coffee, you learned, is patient with people who are not. Historians still argue whether the Ottoman Empire truly embraced coffee for its stimulant properties or for its social implications. Some claim it was the intellectual fuel of revolutions, others that it was merely a habit adopted from Ethiopia and repackaged with flair. You're not sure. But you know that once someone's tasted real coffee, hot, fragrant, shared in quiet company, they're never quite the same again. You open your eyes. Back to work. A man is waving, middle-aged, out-of-town accent, probably a textile merchant. He asks if you have any lokum. You nod.
disappear into the back, and return with a small dish of rose-flavored delight, dusted in powdered sugar. He pops one in his mouth and hums, delighted. "These are from Damascus?" he asks.
You shrug. Maybe, you say. Maybe they just think they're from Damascus. He laughs, orders a coffee to match. These brief encounters, they make the day pass gently, like walking through a soft breeze, each moment unremarkable, yet somehow unforgettable. Outside, the light has begun to shift again. The warmth is still there, but the angle has changed. Afternoon is near. Soon, you'll begin preparing for a new wave of guests, the ones who come not to start their day, but to escape it. Students released from lessons, craftsmen taking a break from chisels and ink, the older men who return for a second cup, claiming it's medicinal. And perhaps it is. Perhaps coffee, in its quiet way, heals something small. Not the body maybe, but the part of the soul worn down by noise and time. You polish a tray, straighten the cushions, top off the sugar jar. You tighten the drawstring on the spice pouch and brush a stray poppy seed from the counter. These motions are not just tasks. They are care made visible. A regular enters. Someone you see every Tuesday, always with a different scarf, always carrying a weathered book. She sits at her usual table, nods at you, and waits. You bring her the usual, strong, unsweetened, and a single dried fig. She opens her book, but doesn't read. You do not ask why. You never ask why. You simply keep the water hot, the coffee flowing, and the silence is comfortable. This, you think, is what the best coffee houses have always done. Not merely serve a beverage, but hold space. A space where time stretches gently, where breath deepens, where the world softens at the edges. You look around your cafe now and you see it clearly. You've built something more than a place. You've built a rhythm, a way of being, and it hums, gently, like a kettle just about to sing. You glance toward the back wall, where a modest shelf holds a jumble of mismatched books. Some are so dog-eared their pages resemble feathered wings. You never meant to build a library, but over the years, people left books behind, on tables, under chairs, even tucked into the rafters as if they knew you'd keep them safe. So now, the shelf has become its own quiet presence in the room. A few customers browse it between sips, others simply like knowing it's there. The current volume on top is a collection of Ottoman folk tales. You recognize the spine, cracked leather, hand-stitched binding. A traveling historian once gifted it to you in exchange for a free meal and a few hours of listening. His stories were long and a little tangled, but his laugh was honest, and he made coffee vanish like a magician. You've forgotten his name, but you remember the sparkle in his eye when he described a djinn hiding in a date pit. That memory lingers longer than any signature in a guest book. You let your gaze travel next to the oil lamp perched near the doorway. It's not lit right now. Sunlight filters gently through the stained glass above, but come evening, that lamp will be the first flame to return. You've trimmed its wick so many times your fingers move without thought. The lamp was a gift too, from a widow who once came every week and sat in silence. She never drank coffee, just water, served cool in a clay cup. One day she stopped coming, but a week later the lamp arrived, wrapped in a scarf. No note. Historians still argue whether objects like this, gifts without names, gestures without explanation, belonged more to social custom or private impulse. But in coffee houses, such things are simply absorbed, accepted. They become furniture for the soul, placed where memory needs a place to sit. A breeze slips under the door, rustling the curtain slightly. You pause, enjoying the flutter, then return to restocking the spice jars. You've been low on clove and cardamom all week. You open the small tin and measure carefully, each pinch releasing an aroma that seems to reach backward through time. There's something sacred in the smell of crushed clove,
sweet but sharp, like a secret whispered with purpose. You remember the first time someone asked you for the wedding blend. It was a young man with nervous fingers, clearly rehearsing some grand gesture. You didn't have such a thing officially, but you nodded and disappeared into the back. You mixed cinnamon, rose, cardamom, and just a trace of orange peel. The result was warm, floral, and oddly hopeful. The young man took it away in a small ceramic cup, trembling. A week later, he returned with her. They sat for hours in the corner, smiling at nothing, drinking everything.
They never told you if it worked, but they came back every month, always asking for the wedding blend. You start a fresh pot now. Just plain coffee this time, no spices, no fuss. Sometimes simple is best. You use the finer ground, sifted twice, to make the flavor gentler. You let the sesve rest a moment on the counter before placing it in the ember ring. The hiss and gurgle of rising foam feels like the room whispering yes. The afternoon hums along. The crowd has shifted again. Some students, a few elders playing chess with a board so worn the pieces wobble. A mother bouncing a baby on her knee while her coffee cools forgotten. Every table tells its own quiet story, overlapping but not colliding. You've always thought of it as a sort of symphony. Improvised, yes, but with moments of perfect harmony. And you, the silent conductor, adjusting the temperature, pouring at the right pace, clearing plates without interrupting a sentence. Outside, the shadows begin to lengthen. You move with them, adjusting the lamps, checking the oil, replacing a cracked saucer. A child at the door asks for water. You give them a cup and a date. No questions. They nod solemnly, as if this is a sacred exchange. Maybe it is. You think again about time. Not the ticking clock kind, but the way time stretches here. The way it folds in on itself, loops around memories, spills over into habits. You've had regulars who visited every day for a decade, and yet the best conversations you've had were often with strangers, travelers passing through, who stayed only long enough to tell you their name and one improbable story about goats and stars. Historians still argue whether Ottoman coffee sellers were mere tradesmen or cultural curators. You think the answer depends on the day. Some days, you're a barista. Other days, a priest. Most days, just someone who knows how to keep a kettle going without burning the bottom. A student approaches the counter, eyes rimmed in red, clearly chasing a deadline. "Extra strong," he whispers, "no sugar." You nod, no judgment. As you prepare his cup, you think about all the other young scholars who've passed through. Some came to study. Others came to hide from the world for a while. Once, a girl recited poetry into her coffee, as if the cup could absorb her longing and keep it warm. You serve the student his drink. He offers a small, tired smile. "Thanks," he mutters. "I'm part of your thesis now." You raise your eyebrow. He explains, "I'm writing about communal spaces in late Ottoman society, coffee houses as emotional infrastructure." You nod. Emotional infrastructure, you rather like that.
Another customer leaves. Another arrives. The air smells like nutmeg and charcoal. The oud player has switched to a new tune, something slow and full of open spaces. You walk through the tables with the tray balanced just so, stepping around elbows, sidestepping dropped napkins. A young couple near the window is arguing in hushed tones. You place a fresh dish of sugared almonds between them. They fall silent. Snack truce. You've learned that sometimes hospitality is nonverbal. A glance, a gesture, a refill before the cup is empty, and always the soft comfort of something warm between the hands. You begin wrapping up preparations for the evening. Extra cups brought out, tables wiped again, napkins folded into neat, pointless triangles, a final check on the coals. You breathe in the scent of ash and sweetness and something indefinable, something you've come to think of as the heart of the place.
You wonder if this rhythm existed long before you, and whether it will remain after you're gone. The historians' books say that some sultans tried to ban coffee houses, fearing that the gatherings might lead to dissent or distraction. But none of the bans ever truly lasted. The people always returned, quietly, stubbornly, as if drawn by gravity or a longing. Because people don't come only for coffee. They come for something slower, something deeper, something that simmers. You look out the door again. A cat slinks past. Someone plays a reed flute 2 alleys down. The air is thick with the scent of rain that never quite falls. And inside your cafe, everything continues. As it always has, as it always will.
Evening eases in like a silk curtain drawn across the sky, the sun slipping away behind the tiled rooftops, leaving only the slow bloom of lantern light in its place. You move more gently now, your steps quieter, as if the hush of twilight deserves your respect. There's something almost reverent about this hour, when day doesn't quite surrender, but night politely insists. You light the oil lamp near the front door, the widow's lamp, as you still think of it. Its tiny flame flickers with a personality all its own, casting amber shadows across the carved wooden beams above. One by one, the other lamps follow, their glow thick and golden, softening the edges of the room. The cafe begins to transform, not into something different, but into a quieter version of itself, like a musician playing the same melody, but slower, softer. You adjust the brazier, stoking the coals so they'll last through the long hours ahead. The scent of roasted coffee beans mixes with the faint perfume of dried rose petals and warm stone. Everything smells like memory. This is your favorite time of day. Outside, the street settles. Carts rumble by less frequently, the shouts of the fishmongers have faded. Children still chase each other, but with the sleepy giddiness of those who know their mothers will soon call them home. Inside your cafe, the rhythm changes too. Customers speak more quietly. They linger longer. A man arrives with his elderly father, guiding him carefully to a corner seat. You bring them both coffee and a small dish of dried figs, soft and sticky. The father sips slowly. The son doesn't speak, just watches. You suspect this visit is more ritual than conversation. But that's fine. Not every cup needs words. At another table, 2 poets begin arguing, playfully, about metaphors for love. One insists that love is a pot of overboiled coffee, unpredictable and bitter. The other claims it's more like cardamom, sharp at first, then slowly comforting. You lean in just long enough to suggest, or maybe love is a borrowed sezve. It only works if you return it. They laugh. You move on. The conversations at night become a different species altogether. Daytime talk is practical. Where is the merchant? Did the new taxes pass? What's the best route to Damascus? But nighttime talk, that's for memory and regret and dreams. The sort of thoughts that only come when your coffee is dark, the coals are low, and no one's in a hurry to leave. A traveling musician enters. Not the oud player. This one carries a tambour, long-necked and worn. He plays softly by the window, plucking notes that sound like raindrops hitting silk. You offer him a drink. He declines, preferring to play first. You understand. Sometimes the music needs to happen before the body can rest. Historians still argue whether music was considered central or merely tolerated in Ottoman coffee houses. Some say the early laws forbade instruments entirely. Others point to painted scrolls depicting lute players seated beside steaming cups. The truth, as usual, is likely somewhere in the steam. Tonight, it feels essential. The music, the shadows, the clinking of spoons, all of it weaves together into something more than ambiance. It becomes part of the architecture. This cafe isn't just made of stone and timber, it's made of repetitions, of small kindnesses, of familiar voices saying, "Same as usual?" and feet tapping lightly to rhythms no one formally learns. Evening eases in like a silk curtain drawn across the sky, the sun slipping away behind the tiled rooftops,
leaving only the slow bloom of lantern light in its place. You move more gently now, your steps quieter, as if the hush of twilight deserves your respect. There's something almost reverent about this hour, when day doesn't quite surrender, but night politely insists. You light the oil lamp near the front door, the widow's lamp as you still think of it. Its tiny flame flickers with a personality all its own, casting amber shadows across the carved wooden beams above. One by one, the other lamps follow, their glow thick and golden, softening the edges of the room. The cafe begins to transform, not into something different, but into a quieter version of itself, like a musician playing the same melody, but slower, softer. You adjust the brazier, stoking the coals so they'll last through the long hours ahead. The scent of roasted coffee beans mixes with the faint perfume of dried rose petals and warm stone. Everything smells like memory. This is your favorite time of day. Outside, the street settles. Carts rumble by less frequently. The shouts of the fishmongers have faded. Children still chase each other, but with the sleepy giddiness of those who know their mothers will soon call them home. Inside your cafe, the rhythm changes too. Customers speak more quietly. They linger longer. A man arrives with his elderly father, guiding him carefully to a corner seat. You bring them both coffee and a small dish of dried figs, soft and sticky. The father sips slowly. The son doesn't speak, just watches. You suspect this visit is more ritual than conversation, but that's fine. Not every cup needs words. At another table, two poets begin arguing, playfully, about metaphors for love. One insists that love is a pot of overboiled coffee, unpredictable and bitter. The other claims it's more like cardamom, sharp at first, but then slowly comforting. You lean in just long enough to suggest, or maybe love is a borrowed sezve. It only works if you return it. They laugh, you move on. The conversations at night become a different species altogether. Daytime talk is practical. Where is the merchant? Did the new taxes pass? What's the best route to Damascus? But nighttime talk? That's for memory and regret and dreams. The sort of thoughts that only come when your coffee is dark, the coals are low, and no one's in a hurry to leave. A traveling musician enters. Not the oud player. This one carries a tambour, long-necked and worn. He plays softly by the window, plucking notes that sound like raindrops hitting silk. You offer him a drink. He declines, preferring to play first. You understand. Sometimes the music needs to happen before the body can rest. Historians still argue whether music was considered central or merely tolerated in Ottoman coffeehouses. Some say the early laws forbade instruments entirely. Others point to painted scrolls depicting lute players seated beside steaming cups. The truth, as usual, is likely somewhere in the steam. Tonight, it feels essential. The music, the shadows, the clinking of spoons, all of it weaves together into something more than ambiance. It becomes part of the architecture. This cafe isn't just made of stone and timber, it's made of repetitions, of small kindnesses, of familiar voices saying, same as usual, and feet tapping lightly to rhythms no one formally learns.
You barely notice the transition anymore, from night to deep night. It happens slowly, like water cooling in a clay jug. One moment, there's laughter near the chess table. The next, just the faint scrape of a chair being drawn in. The cafe empties gradually, but never all at once. It's as though your guests know instinctively that the silence must be preserved, like a fragile glaze on porcelain. Only a few remain. The old man with the chipped cup has long since shuffled home. The tambour player packed his instrument and disappeared into the moonlight. Even the poets grew tired, leaving behind a scrap of parchment with half a metaphor scrawled across it. Something about cardamom and heartbreak. You folded it and tucked it into the drawer where you keep the philosopher's star map, a growing archive of thoughts left behind. Now, the cafe is mostly yours again, but not entirely. One woman remains, seated near the window where the lantern light flickers on the glass. She's writing, or drawing, or perhaps just pretending to do either. A pot of coffee sits beside her, mostly full. You offered to warm it once. She declined without speaking. It seems the point is not the drinking, but the presence of the cup itself. You understand this well. Some nights, the coffee is just a prop. Outside, the street is almost still. The wind, mild and aimless, rustles the hanging herbs in the window. Somewhere far off, a donkey brays once, as if to remind the world it exists. But otherwise, everything is suspended in that strange in-between where time flattens. You stretch your back behind the counter and begin the quiet work of closing. Not closing the cafe itself, not yet, but preparing for that final slide into rest. First, the water glasses. You gather them gently, like a priest collecting relics, each one placed into the basin, a soft clink marking its surrender. Then, the napkins. The half-folded ones are refolded with precision. Those left crumpled are tossed into the small basket by the stove to be washed in the morning. You've always liked how linen wrinkles, like it remembers being used. And finally, the sezves. Some are still warm. You rinse them one by one, letting your fingers linger on the worn wooden handles, polished by decades of palms. Each one has its own balance, its own whisper of weight. You could probably match each sezve to a regular customer by feel alone. This one, slightly off-center, belongs to the merchant who always asks for double sugar. That tiny one, barely enough for a child's cup, was a gift from a widow who once insisted that real hospitality meant never offering more than was needed. Historians still argue whether Ottoman coffee sellers were mere tradesmen or cultural custodians. You think the distinction is meaningless. Anyone who keeps rituals alive, who tends to community like a garden, is something more than a shopkeeper. They're a lighthouse. And tonight, your beacon still glows.
The woman by the window finally closes her notebook and looks up. Her eyes are tired but not weary. She nods once, thanks, goodbye, good night, all folded into the smallest of gestures, and you nod back. She leaves her cup behind. You clear her table slowly, savoring the moment when the room becomes entirely your own again. You walk through the cafe as if it were a living thing. You smooth the cushions, straighten the trays, blow gently on the last flame of the final oil lamp, letting the darkness return with ceremony. But you leave the brazier glowing. Always. It's your promise to the night. Sometimes you wonder what this space will be a century from now. Will it still smell like coffee and cardamom? Will someone else walk these same flagstones, carrying cups and listening more than speaking? Or will it be gone? A bakery, a tailor's, an apartment. Maybe the philosopher was right. Time is a circle. Maybe some version of you has always been here and always will be, repeating the motions across the centuries like notes in a lullaby. Your own teacher, the coffee seller who trained you, once said, "You don't sell coffee, you sell quiet." At the time you laughed. Now you understand. There's a knock at the door. You frown. It's late, later than late, but you open it anyway. And there he is, a boy, maybe 14, shivering slightly, dust on his sleeves. He holds out a small package. "For you," he mumbles, from the market stall with the brass trays. You recognize the handwriting on the tag, the supplier who promised a new set of tiny spoons engraved with pomegranate vines. You'd nearly forgotten. You thank the boy, press a coin into his hand, and watch him vanish down the alley like a shadow. Inside again, you unwrap the spoons. The perfect. You hold one up to the brazier, watching it catch the red light. It looks like a crescent moon caught in fire. You imagine the stories it will hear in the weeks to come, the spilled secrets, the flirtations disguised as orders, the laughter, the grief softened by sugar. One tiny spoon, a universe. You place it carefully with the others in the wooden drawer lined with velvet scraps. Then, at last, you pour yourself one final cup, just for you. You sit, you sip, you close your eyes. For a moment, the cafe breathes with you. It exhales, it releases. All the stories of the day settle into its walls like incense smoke into cloth. You're not tired, not exactly, but you feel folded, as though the day has closed itself around you, tucking you into its seams. There's peace in that. You take another sip. The coffee is strong, even now, but it doesn't jolt, it doesn't stir. It simply warms. Somewhere outside, the sky begins to lighten at the edges, just barely. A bird calls once, and you know it's nearly time to begin again. But not yet. For now, you rest.
You sit still for a while, letting the warmth of that final cup wrap around your chest like a thick shawl. The coffee's edge has softened, giving way to something rounder, like roasted almonds or a half-remembered lullaby. The brazier hums faintly. It's your only companion now, glowing with the kind of patience only inanimate things seem to possess. The hush in the room is total. Not silent exactly, but full of a certain fullness. The kind that comes when the last guest has left and nothing more is expected of you. No more cups to fill, no orders to remember, no polite nods or silent signals passed with a raised brow and a glance at the sugar bowl. Just breath and firelight, and the wooden bones of this old cafe creaking quietly as if sighing. There's something sacred about the hour just before dawn. Not yet morning, no longer night. It's a liminal space, a crack in the rhythm of time itself. You move through it carefully, like a monk crossing an icy river on stepping stones. Each motion is slower, more deliberate, as though rushing might cause the spell to break. You rinse your own cup and set it upside down on the wooden rack. That was your last sip of the day, or your first, depending on how you define time. Historians still argue whether the Ottoman day began at sundown or sunrise, depending on religious calendar or civil custom. You've stopped trying to reconcile it. Here, your day ends with your last coffee, and tomorrow begins when the first pot boils again. You take out the broom and begin sweeping, starting from the corners and working inward. The debris is barely visible, just a few breadcrumbs, some dust, maybe the shell of a pistachio. Still, the ritual matters. You aren't cleaning mess, you're clearing memory. There's a quiet pleasure in this part of the routine. The circular motions of the broom, the gentle tap-tap as you empty the pan into the tin bin. You recall your mentor's words again. A clean floor makes clean coffee. You never questioned him. Even if it wasn't literally true, it felt true. And some truths don't require proof, just practice. You wipe down the tabletops with a cloth dampened with rose water. Not too much, just enough to leave a whisper behind. You pause at one table where someone left a coin, not for the bill, but as a token. A tiny bronze charm rests beside it.
shaped like a miniature crescent moon. You smile. You've received stranger offerings. Once, a lovesick shepherd left a page torn from a folk tale, soaked with tears and the smell of sheep. Another time, a spice trader gave you a walnut shell containing a rolled-up poem. And there was the musician who left behind his comb because it held songs between its teeth. You've kept them all. You glance over at the drawer beneath the counter where you store them, little reliquaries of passing souls. The drawer is nearly full now, a cluttered museum of your unofficial ministry. You sometimes think future archaeologists will find it and assume it was some strange form of worship.
Maybe they won't be entirely wrong. You dim the lanterns one by one. The cafe grows darker, yes, but not gloomier. More restful, like a cat curling into itself. One lamp left, just one, by the front window. You keep it on so early risers passing by might know that this haven exists. Not yet open, but present. Even that tiny glow feels generous. You open the back door and step outside into the courtyard. The sky is the color of watered ink, gently paling. Birds are beginning to stir in the branches above. The faint scent of bread drifts over from the bakery 3 doors down. First loaves going into the fire. It smells like tomorrow. You stand there, hands in your pockets, breathing it in. A small fountain trickles in the corner. You walk to it, scoop a little water into your hands, and splash your face. The cold shock is bracing, but not unwelcome. It's the final note of the symphony, the last drumbeat before silence. As you dry your face on your sleeve, you glance at the fig tree near the garden wall. It's bare this time of year, but still holds its shape proudly. A single bird lands on the highest branch, tilts its head, and sings once, just once. You nod in appreciation and return inside. The brazier has begun to dim. You stir it with the iron rod and let the ashes settle. You know you'll need to relight it in just a couple of hours when your first customer arrives, a baker's apprentice who likes his coffee thick, no sugar, and with a hint of clove. He'll sit on the same stool every time and never say more than 4 words. Strong, please, thank you. And so it begins again. But not yet. You hang your apron on its hook behind the counter, smoothing it as you do. The fabric smells faintly of coffee, smoke, and soap. Your own peculiar cologne. Before leaving the cafe floor, you pause. You look around the room. It's empty, yes, but never vacant. Every inch of this space holds a presence, an echo, a memory stitched into the fabric of the walls. You see the ghosts of laughter, the footprints of arguments, the warmth of confessions whispered into cups. And somehow, in all of this, you are both participant and witness. You close your eyes and let the stillness carry you. There are no more tasks for tonight. Only the promise of rest. And beyond that, another pot to brew, another story to hear, another stranger to welcome. That is your calling, not to serve coffee, but to offer a space where people can be, can rest, can remember who they are when no one is watching. And that's more than enough. You reach for the final lamp and gently snuff the flame. Darkness returns, but it doesn't feel empty. It feels earned.
And now the fire has gone quiet, the cups have cooled, and the moonlight has begun its slow retreat behind the minarets. The day's final breath has been exhaled, and you're left in that delicious stillness where even the thoughts in your mind begin to walk more softly. You feel the warmth of the brazier,
lingering like a gentle hand on your back. The cafe, once full of murmurs and clinking saucers, now rests in complete serenity. The chairs are aligned, the spoons are stacked. The scents of cardamom, smoke, and rosewater remain behind like a whispered blessing. The rhythms of the Ottoman coffee cellar have come to a close for tonight. You've swept, you've steeped, you've listened, and you've watched the world turn gently from one hour to the next. You've witnessed silence, not as an absence, but as a presence, a kind of guest who never demands anything, and yet gives everything in return. And just like that, you breathe out one more time, slower now. Your body eases into stillness. The mind follows, willingly. The edges of your thoughts begin to blur, their urgency softening like ink in water. The lantern's glow dims behind your eyelids, and all that remains is a gentle flicker in the distance. Let the weight of your limbs settle deep into your sheets, like flour settling at the bottom of a bowl. There's no more coffee to pour, no more coins to count, no more steps to take. Only rest, curling up beside you like steam rising from a quiet cup. You've walked the quiet path of a coffee cellar, and now it's time to sleep. Sleep now. Sleep.